Okay, residential advisors, what's the most painful parent-student separation you've ever seen? There was one helicopter parenting situation. I'd left my phone number at a desk for a desk attendant one night I was on duty. A resident saw this, my personal number, and gave it to his dad. The dad calls me and immediately starts yelling that there's a leak in his son's bathroom ceiling and that wee-wee has been leaking through it. Okay, how long? For a week. Has he done anything about it? Notified anyone? You're the RA, you're supposed to know. The dad chews me out for 10 more minutes. I check out the kid's room. He's got towels all over the bathroom floor. I look up at the ceiling. Super light leak and definitely not wee-wee. I tell him so and tell him to file a maintenance request. He demands that I do it for him. I point him in the right direction, but he's a big boy, so no. He demands to know if what I know is water is actually wee-wee. I casually ask why he let what he thought was number 1 leak into his apartment for a whole week. As I go to leave, he tells me he's going to demand that the university pay for his ruined, read wet, towels, and he wants my contact info to file a complaint. I nod, give him the info, and I leave. His dad calls me a day later, but I'd spoken to my boss the night before. Hi, I'm calling on behalf of… Yes, I know, sir, but I'm an RA and I handle students' problems. If he wants my attention, he can call me himself, otherwise I don't report to you. Have a nice day, sir. Delete my number. The mum thought she'd be able to live with the daughter in the dorms. Upon being told that wasn't possible, she withdrew the daughter and they both went back home. I've been an RA for 3 years now. Every year, without fail, there's always that family that helps their kid move in on Sunday and then stays the entire freshman orientation week until school actually starts the next Monday. Except the freshmen obviously have activities to go through all throughout the week, so the parents, who can't accompany their kids to the activities, either sit around the kids' room or in the lobby of the dorm. It drives me crazy. Last year was particularly bad, with an entire family of mum, dad, siblings, cousins, all camped out in the dorm's lobby for a week. The university seemed to pick up on the fact that this is a problem, because this year they introduced a new event into the orientation week, a goodbye lunch specifically for parents to give them the hint it was time to leave. This really was a stealth helicopter parent story grouping, wasn't it? I'm sure there'll be others, but for now let's just focus on this whole frickin' helicopter family, including cousins. What the heck? Also, love the passive-aggressiveness of that university. Oddest story I had was one room that had 2 completely different roommates. Not like goth and yacht club, odd couple sort of thing, but 2 different away-from-home experiences. One had been in a boarding school for years and was laid back. The second was a homeschooler with drill sergeant dad and doting mother. The laid-back resident's parents didn't even show up. I asked him if he came alone and he said his parents were in town, but wanted to avoid the chaos and would say goodbye tomorrow. Second resident almost seemed dazed when his parents left. His dad told him to stay in college, like an order, while mum cried and took forever to leave. The next day I checked in on both. One was gone. The homeschooled one had moved out, drove a few hours and had arrived at his house 20 minutes after his parents did. A fellow student in the dorm was from the same town and even the same church, which is how we found out. The parent of the remaining resident had showed up the next day, asked where their son's room was at. I told them and they thanked me, then asked if the freshmen had events planned or if they were free for dinner because they wanted to take their son and his new roommate out for dinner. In short, one resident, sheltered his whole life, couldn't last 24 hours away from extreme parents. Oh, frickin' A. I had one of those living across from me, only it went on for an entire year. Excuse the wall of text. In New Zealand, practice is that you're only allowed in the dorms during your first year, or if you have a disability that living on campus will be helpful for. And we say halls of residence, or halls for short. Disabled students always get first dibs on the ground floor dorms. Internationals get self-catered kitchen dorms. Out-of-town New Zealanders get randomly given the leftovers, and lastly, the locals get what's left, if there's anything. And as my uni could only house slightly under 2,000 students but would get well over 4,000 applicants, very few locals ever got in. So the fact that my hallmate and neighbour managed to snag a room despite living a 30-minute drive away within the same city was surprising and impressive. Her national sports comps were probably what did it. Cut to night 1 in the halls. It's just after 4 a.m. I hear banging on my door. I unlock it, my hallmate sticks in her head, turns on my light, tosses me her key, tells me to watch her room and leaves. I only met her like 2 p.m. the previous day, so I was thinking, what the frick is she trusting me for? and she didn't even lock her door when she left. It was wide open, with almost everything still in it. At 5 a.m., in a building with 30 other people, many hungover or still drunk, who became the infamous building for door handle theft. My anxiety was through the roof. She came back just before lunch, got her keys, ate a salad, explained nothing, acted like an otherwise normal sane human who missed her folks like everyone else. Dinner comes, and afterwards she passes me her keys again and leaves. Leaves everything unlocked again, gives no explanation, even leaves her phone behind. And she did it again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Right up until O Week ended, by which time the whole building knew she slept at her parents' every night. I feel like I'm keeping some kind of dangerous secret by having the keys, but what can you do? She was a really good friend when she was around. During the semester, she'd stay in her room between classes, she'd eat at the lunch bar, hang out in the study space, sometimes she'd eat breakfast with us after being dropped off, but come dinner's end, I got her keys. She only actually slept in her room 5 times? I counted. It was such a frickin' waste of money, time, and someone else's spot. I still talk and study with her 3 years on, and she's fully and finally moved out now. She'll still give me her keys if she leaves on the weekend, despite now having roommates, a boyfriend, and her cousins living a few doors down who'd all be better candidates. I've just resigned myself to it, though I still don't know why I'm the chosen one. I'm too scared to ask at this point. More funny than sad or bad, but this happened when I was moving into the dorms in my freshman year. I'm the second child in my family, so my parents had already gone through it once. My dad saw another father on move-in day who looked like he was on the verge of tears. My dad, trying to be friendly to the stranger, went up to talk to him. "First kid going to college?" "No, it's just that I went to Michigan and my daughter's going to Michigan State. It's really hard for me." When I was an RA in 2014 through 15, one of my residents was 27 or 28 and was still having a hard time moving out of the house. But not because of her emotions. Her parents came over every night for dinner, they were over an hour away, and they kept on trying to get her to drop out and move back home. It became really hard for her. It got to the point where she asked me and the other RAs to tell her parents that she was out when they came to see her. They got mad since the first time we had to tell them that. She didn't know what she was going to do after the school year ended, but that she didn't want to move back home. She just wanted to be free from them. My God, I mean, this sounds like a job for the Witness Protection Program, or more realistically, an intervention by a therapist. Who am I kidding? If they've made it this far, it's going to take them a miracle to stop getting involved. A friend's dorm had the worst case of parent-student separation that I've ever seen. You see, there wasn't any separation. At least there wouldn't have been if the mother had had her way. The day after move-in, the girl's mother showed up in the middle of the day and asked for keys to the daughter's room. Yeah, no. Then she wanted someone to come with her upstairs and let her in. She was only there to get her daughter's dirty clothing. Why can't she do that? Still no. After 20 minutes of arguing, the woman left a note and told the poor guy at the front desk that it wasn't the last he'd heard from her, and insinuated that he was some kind of prevert or unspeakable act offender for covering the desk in a woman's dorm. She said he'd be lucky if firing and being kicked out of school was all that happened to him. When the student was informed, she seemed totally embarrassed, apologized for her mother, and said that it wouldn't happen again. 2 days later, the woman came back at 5:30 in the morning, shoulder-surfed the passcode to the building, and then, when her child wouldn't answer calls from the lobby phone, she snuck upstairs when one of the residents was leaving. She woke up the entire wrong floor of people by banging at the door to an empty room, and eventually got escorted out by my friend and public safety. "But I just want to take my baby out for breakfast. How am I going to know she's eating right if I don't? I'm her mother and I pay for everything, so you can't make me leave. I'm going to sue you. You're trying to keep me from my baby." Public safety had to keep one of their staff in the lobby 24/7 for the next 3 weeks. It would have only been a few days, but scuttlebutt was that she tried twice more, including once in disguise. And by disguise, I mean sunglasses, a baseball hat, and a set of university sweats. Engineering school in the 1970s. A mum dropped her kid off at his dorm and drove away. Yep, pushed his suitcase and a few boxes out of the car, told Junior goodbye, study hard, and left. Junior was 15 frickin' years old, a super genius child prodigy with 0 social skills. His roommates were horrified, but most of them had little brothers, so big brother parenting kicked right in. The kid was pretty well socialized by the end of the first semester and had a collection of de facto big brothers and big sisters helping him live his life. It was a relief because as a house counselor, I was really worried I was going to have a bad situation on my hands. I didn't need to do anything at all. I did buy the older guys beers a few times to thank them. I had to tell the parents of an 18-year-old freshman that I'm not allowed to key you into her room to set up a surprise party. Even if Mum is paying for the dorm, it's a legal thing. Mum was angry. She called her daughter, who then agreed we should have keyed them into her room because Mum is paying. Sorry, still not allowed. Their roommate talked to me privately. She's very pleased that we didn't let strangers in while she was doing the deed with her boyfriend, and that is why we have rules. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked in housing. I think the worst was the overprotective mother. She constantly called her son, who ended up not answering after the third call of the day. The mum would call his RA, who'd go into the student's room and tell him to call his mum. If he didn't do this, she called the RA again and had this on repeat. It hit its climax when the mother couldn't get her son or the RA on the line and called the office in a fit of panic that her son had done substances and died. Nope. He was just playing pool and ignoring his phone. I think the director of housing stepped in at that point and we didn't hear anything after that. This kid's mum left him a $100 Subway gift card for food. He sold it to another freshman for $20 to buy alcohol from an older student. He then proceeded to spend the next 2 weeks begging food and money from people. In addition, any legal issues or housing violations we had, this kid just happened to be around for them. Never really the perpetrator, but he always seemed to be there. Had a neighbor a couple of doors down in my freshman year that moved in and immediately started taking green herb in his room in the middle of the day with dozens of other freshmen and parents still milling around the floor moving stuff. My roommate and I walked by and tried to tell him to keep it on the down low, but someone had already called the cops. The guy got a possession and paraphernalia charge and had to go down to the station, then attend an academic council. He barely scraped by but was able to stay. Sounds like the guy could have benefited from a little more helicopter parenting, to be completely honest, if only to knock the damn thing out of his hands until things quietened down. My RA time was in the early 90s. The worst I saw was a guy who cried for 4 days after his mum dropped him off. It was the first time he had been away from home and had been extremely sheltered and couldn't handle being alone. It took a while, but his roommate was friendly and a genuinely nice guy, and he helped him acclimate. The second wasn't necessarily separation issues, but a fight between a father and the roommate. His son was hetero, and he and the dad were both strict Christian and macho stereotypical jock types. He saw the posters that his roommate had up, mostly muscly men in Speedos and musical posters. They both went ballistic and started attacking the poor kid. He stood up for himself and they jumped him. It took me, the other RA, and 3 other guys from the floor to pull them off. We ended up kicking him out of the dorm and he was reprimanded by the university. This was over a decade ago. Mum and Dad moved their daughter onto my floor. Most parents arrive and leave within 3 to 4 hours. This family were one of the first to arrive at 8:30 when the doors opened, and they spent the morning decorating. I was busy, so I said, "Hi," and kept on trucking. They took their daughter out for lunch and got back at like 2 p.m. It's a very nice send-off so far. At 4 p.m., they were still there. The room was decorated, the daughter and dad were just awkwardly sitting there, not sure of what to do, but the mum was fussing back and forth around the tiny dorm room. At 6 p.m., I was rounding up anyone who wasn't already down for dinner to make sure the introverts didn't just hide in their rooms on the first night. This family was still sitting in this room together. So I said, "Hey, we're all going down for dinner. Ashley, would you like to join us?" Her mum answered, "Well, we're sort of getting set up here, so..." And seeing what was happening, I said, "Well, move-in hours expired an hour ago and we're a little strict about visitors, as I'm sure you can understand. Why don't you guys say your goodbyes and Ashley can meet us downstairs?" The mum non-committally said, "Okay, we'll see." But I had like 10 other people with me, so I couldn't wait around. I got back to my floor at 8 p.m. and they were still there. Almost 12 hours now. I was trying to be polite and compassionate for the mum's sake, but I told them the parents would need a visitor's pass for staying the night if they wanted to stay longer. The mum didn't say anything to me but confirmed that she'd heard the message. About 20 minutes later, the parents left. I talked to Ashley and she said her mum was really overbearing. I introduced her to some of the other girls who might run in the same cliques, and she settled in really well after that. This mum ended up being my freaking nightmare for the first 2 months of that semester. Not an RA, but on the move-in day of my first year of uni, one of my 5 flatmates called us all into the kitchen to demand that we each let her 2 parents, 4 siblings, and 4 grandparents sleep in our rooms for the next week. The kicker? None of them would be staying in her room because she, quote, needed her space. Oh, and the other kicker, her family lives half an hour away from campus. They didn't want to be too far from her in case something happened. This was the first time I'd met her in person, and obviously we all said no to her demands. How are you going to ensure that my daughter remains a virgin? I can't do that, sir. That conversation will have to happen between you and her. Oh, I remember the nice dad who came to me asking if I'd seen the box of his daughter's handmade crafts and decorations. He was pretty sad. Someone must have picked it up accidentally, and I never saw it returned. This one is pretty wholesome, in the opposite direction of the worst. The mum was foreign, maybe Italian or Eastern European. She hugs her really tall son goodbye. You can tell it's a huge deal to her. She leaves, and I watch him walk towards his dorm with the biggest smile on his face. Favorite moment from move-in day. Not an RA, but I was involved in campus life and move-in. There's always several students who bring in all their stuff and bring it right back out 2 hours later because they aren't ready to leave. It honestly breaks my heart every time. I've seen one specific person do this 3 years in a row. I think she's living at home and taking community college classes now. We had one girl who lied to her family for months that she had a dorm room. She even showed up with her family and her things, and when we didn't have a room for her, she just broke down and sobbed. Like, holy heck, she had her family drive 8 hours north for this. I don't know how she endured that car ride. Oh hey, did you know my college roommate? It wasn't exactly the same circumstances, but one of my 2 roommates freshman year showed up on move-in day and set up her bed and desk and everything. She convinced her family she'd unpack the rest later, then she toured the campus with them and said goodbye. Then she grabbed the giant box of all the things she actually needed, clothes, toiletries, etc., and moved them to her boyfriend's house off campus where she stayed all year, while still paying for the dorm. It was absolutely bonkers to me that her family never apparently found out. Worked out for me though, I had the space of a triple while only having 1 roommate instead of 2. Haha, well that's one way to get your conservative family off your back, I guess. I think whether or not we think this girl is being a manipulative monster probably lies in whether her family or her were paying, and whether she was forced to take this measure by oppressively traditional parents or not. It sounds like the relationship worked out though, at least for that year. Just yesterday, I had some parents who wanted to set up a webcam in the hallway in front of their daughter's room so that they could see when she got back and who was entering her room. Not an RA, but helpful with moving in every year I was at college. Free food, yay! Every day there'd be at least one family who brought a U-Haul, not just the trailer but the full truck, full of stuff that they, quote, can't live without. It was usually someone who was planning on pledging to a sorority and had boxes upon boxes of costumes. More often than not, they were moving into rooms where, after splitting the space with a roommate, they had less space than was in that truck. There was also the people who expected us to do everything for them. No, I don't know what room you're in, and no, I'm not hauling that full-size fridge up there for you. I was an RA for 3 years, and while this wasn't move-in day, it's probably the worst parent interaction I've ever had, and I worked in the school's conduct office as a grad student where parents would call angry because their precious angel broke housing policy. This kid was a sophomore, roughly about 20, and his parents moved him in at the beginning of the spring semester. I went door to door, welcoming residents back and welcoming new residents to the floor, and then I got to this kid's room. The parents were setting up everything for him, and he's standing in the corner just watching with a blank expression. I introduce myself, ask his preferred name, nickname, etc., and ask if there's anything I can do to help. Total silence, and his parents look at me like I'm the scum of the earth for talking to them. Flash forward maybe a month. The kid is having roommate problems, and so after some mediation, they decide to go separate directions, with the roommate moving into a different room in the building. So now, this kid lives alone. I should say that they had a busy schedule and friends in other buildings, so they weren't around much, which is what made this next part of the story very difficult. It was a Saturday morning, in probably February, so we weren't even that far into the semester, and who shows up but this kid's parents? Okay, cool. Coming to visit your kid is nice, right? Wrong. Kid wasn't answering his door, so the parents came and knocked on my door at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, demanding to know where he was. Not being his babysitter, I didn't know, but his parents had stuff for him and asked if they could leave it with me because they didn't want someone to steal it. Being the nice person I am, I agree, thinking, oh, it'll probably be a box of stuff. Again, wrong. 5 boxes of food, clothing, video games, and books later, the parents have left and told me to tell their kid to call them. Now, I go and knock on this kid's door every hour because I have to leave that afternoon and I'm getting no response. I call my supervisor and explain the situation, and we end up calling the campus police to do a wellness check, because no one has seemed to have seen this kid in the past 24 hours. The kid finally comes back from the library, he slept there, and he's annoyed that we entered his room, again, with the police present. Oh no, this isn't the last of it. Since I agreed to hold on to stuff for the parents that one time, every time they'd come to visit, every 2 weeks, and they lived 2 hours away, they'd bang on my door at an absurd hour to demand to know where their son was. At one point, one of my fellow RAs left the building to find the parents in the lobby, asking everyone who came by there where I was because I wasn't answering my door, and how would they know where their son was without me? Truly, the kids suffered from helicopter parents and just didn't like calling them. Go figure. This happened for the rest of the semester, and at move-out, they forgot and left their kid there until 10 p.m. when the dorms closed at 6, and the poor kid was just sitting on the sidewalk waiting for them. In short, I tried to be an accommodating RA, and parents mistook me as a babysitter for their 20-year-old son.
Were you ever that one in a million? If so, what's your story? I am a 19-year-old male. In August of last year, I was driving with my sister when suddenly her face turned cold. "Gavin, your eyes are yellow," I remember her saying. I quickly pulled down the passenger's mirror, and to my horror, 2 yellow eyes radiated back at me. Fast forward, I spent a month being sick. The initial diagnosis was hepatitis A. Went back to the doctor, nothing was better. Things were worse, in fact. Was sent to the ER, then to the liver transplant unit at UCSF. By this point, my eyes had turned muddy orange, and my pee was the color of a mahogany tree. Anyways, the team of liver doctors at UCSF managed to save my liver. I was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis. Oh, and my eyes were wide again. Not me, my wife. We lived in Jacksonville, Florida. She rarely gets sick, but has mild insomnia. Around Wednesday, she had a low fever and complained of aches and sweats at night and trouble sleeping. That weekend, she wanted to see the doctor. I told her she probably had the flu, just wasn't used to the aches, and she always has trouble sleeping. But if she was still feeling bad Sunday, we'd go to a clinic. Saturday night, she couldn't sleep, so we made an appointment for Sunday afternoon. But on our way there, sure enough, she's feeling better. Doctor checks her out. She's feeling fine now, no fever. He says she probably had meningitis but is recovering. I'm due to go on a business trip to California the next day, Monday, and ask him if he thinks it's fine to go. He says, yeah, no problem. That evening, wife is eating and laughing and all is good. Monday morning, I leave early. That afternoon, my neighbor calls and lets me know my wife was wandering in the street in a delirium. My wife didn't know where she was, so the neighbor drove her to the ER. I book a flight home that night. The hospital checks her out. She has a fever, her blood cell count is in the basement, and she is completely out of it mentally. They're not sure what's wrong, and a bunch of specialists start descending on her. I have to fill out a bunch of paperwork on her medical history, where we've been, etc. They think maybe it's some weird autoimmune disorder. Not good. She gets a bunch of transfusions and put on a cocktail of meds while they figure it out. Third day in the hospital, the infectious disease guy comes in. Blood parasite. Maybe tick-borne. She'd been to the Midwest recently. Could have caught it if she went walking in the woods or a park. Next day he comes in, figured out the parasite. Why didn't you tell me she left the country? Huh? She hasn't. Well, she has malaria. Malaria? I thought you couldn't get that in the US. You can't. You need to go home and bring me her passport. What the heck? I retrieve her passport. CDC comes, does a whole case study on her, which they wouldn't release to us. Mosquito traps set up around the neighborhood. Mysterious vans start driving by spewing clouds of stuff. My wife stays in the ICU for a week, but recovers just fine. If you look at the 2010 CDC infectious disease report, you'll see a discussion of malaria and how the XX number of cases all are related to people recently returned from endemic areas, except for one woman in Duval County, Florida, who received it from a cryptic vector. When I was 14 years old, I woke up one day with heavy stomach cramps. We called the hospital and they told us that I probably have a stomach flu and should go to the doctor next morning. After one of the worst nights ever, vomiting and sleeping next to the toilet, we went to the doctor. I had a fever of 40 degrees Celsius and was aching a lot. The doctor told me I had to go to the ER and have it checked out because she thought my appendix was inflamed and causing the pain. We went to the ER and I stayed in the hospital for about 2 weeks, but they couldn't find anything. They treated me with broad-range antibiotics, and after 2 weeks I was feeling a bit better and they told me to go home and recover. The night I got back from the hospital, I went to bed and started hallucinating that I lived in a retirement home and that pirates were coming to steal our food. So I was flailing around trying to fend off pirates when my mother came in and asked what all the fuss was about. I told her what was going on and she looked at me like I had summoned a devil. She took my temperature and she instantly took me to the ER again. I had a 41 degrees Celsius fever. When we went back to the hospital, I got immediately treated for inflammation and they did a wide range of tests again. They saw that something in my body was inflamed, but they couldn't find it. I stayed in the hospital for about 2 more weeks when they finally found what was going on. My appendix was inflamed and burst the night I was having the hallucinations, but on all the scans they couldn't see my appendix. The doctor told me that if I came in 2 days later, I would have died because of the pus flowing in my body. Apparently, there is a 1% chance of all the appendix cases that the appendix is so stretched out that they couldn't see it on the scans, or that the area was so inflamed they didn't see it. So after staying on antibiotics for about 2 more weeks, they finally removed my appendix and all the pain was gone. I stayed in the hospital for over 4 weeks just because of my appendix and my bad luck on being that 1%. For my 7th birthday, we went to Disneyland. They just happened to be having a car a day giveaway when we were there. For my 7th birthday, Mickey Mouse gave me a Pontiac Firebird. I'm allergic to potatoes. Never met someone else who is, so I guess it's 1 in a million. Never eaten chips or fries. How I met my wife. I'm from the Netherlands, she's from the US. We met in Israel. It was my first weekend in Israel. Decided to go on a pub crawl to meet some people and have fun. As I'm buying the ticket, my now wife walks up to the counter to also buy a ticket. The girl working there introduces us. We hit it off the first night, but I'm leaving in 2 days to stay with friends of friends in the middle of the desert for 3 months. 2 days after I leave, I lose my phone, don't have any way to get back in touch with her. I had little money and could stay work with the people in the desert. But I kept thinking about her, so after a week, I say I'm leaving. Take the next bus, goes 3 times a week at 5 a.m., and then a train to Tel Aviv. I had no idea how to find her, where to stay, and very little money. I email a couple hostels to find a work-stay agreement. Those jobs are very popular and usually planned months in advance. I get an email back when I arrive in Tel Aviv. I can come in for an interview because they have a spot. This is already ridiculously lucky. Right after the interview and dropping off my belongings, I went back to the first hostel to see if they would give me information. They wouldn't give me anything. Now I'm at a loss. Tel Aviv is a city of more than 500,000 people. I don't know anyone and have little more than the clothes on my back. Kind of defeated, I start wandering around and exploring the city. After a couple hours, I get hungry and decide to treat myself to a restaurant. I'm well out of the tourist area and find a place that's almost empty and rather cheap. I sit down, order a drink and something to eat. As I get my food, I see my now wife walking past the restaurant. She sees me, I see her. I'm literally dumbstruck and just kind of grin and wave. Remember how I lost my phone? She didn't know that and just thought I ignored her. She waves and keeps walking. I throw like 200 shekels, way too much, on the table and sprint after her, explained, and the rest is history. When I was a kid, I was chilling in the water of the Mediterranean Sea in Turkey. Suddenly, I felt an awful burning sensation on my stomach and my legs. I looked like I had been brutally sandpapered and I got a 40 degrees Celsius fever. Turns out I made contact with a jellyfish and later found out that it hadn't happened on that beach for 10 years or so. I was just extremely unlucky. Not sure about the odds on this one, but I survived a non-survivable plane crash. I was on an old PO2, famous for being very safe and uncrashable, on a tour of the desert in western China when I was like 7. My father's friend who hosted me and piloted the plane didn't survive, but somehow I got out with a concussion and apparently passed out for almost a day in the middle of the desert, in the wreckage of the crash, 50 kilometers from the town airport on the edge of the desert. The people who found me were some tree planters. A lot of people who live in these desert towns in China do this. Found me on their way, picking up a shipment, and the only reason they looked was because they were making a bet on how fast the egg would cook in the sand and went off to the road to test. First things first, according to legends, 15 minutes. I never tasted it though. So according to my dad, the theory that I might have lived was because the plane was mostly made out of fabrics and wood. So when the plane crashed, the front half collapsed and took the majority of the impact. Though I got knocked out, I was probably covered under the wreckage and in the shades. It cooled me off enough to survive for a day or so. I was in 2 separate car crashes in 2 separate cars in less than 45 minutes apart. I wasn't the driver for either crash. First car was hit from the side, friend came and picked us up, car lost traction, and we slid off the road and hit a pole. Neither was that bad, just poor timing. I slept wrong one night and pinched a nerve in my neck so severely I lost the right side of my body. It just went silent like it wasn't there for months. I woke up in the worst pain I've ever experienced and couldn't talk, move, or do anything. The ER doctor thought I was having a stroke. My doctor had never seen a case as severe as mine, and it was purely a freak accident. Recovery took months, but I have use of my leg and hand again, with some numbness. Other than pain and spasms, I'm mostly back to normal. A bird got into my room through a tiny hole in the ceiling and took a dump on me. Had 2 11-centimeter benign tumors growing in my spine, resulting in gradual paralysis from my chest down. They had no idea how the tumors formed. Surgery took 11 hours when they thought it would take 4 because the tumors were so complexly woven throughout my spine. I now have pretty much half a spine and chronic pain, but I'd take that over losing my life from paralysis and being unable to breathe. The first one, I don't know about the exact odds, but I was born on 7/7/77 and weighed 7 pounds and 7 ounces. Sadly though, I clocked in at 6:50 a.m. The other is that around the age of 14, I started to notice the outsides of both of my feet starting to get much wider. After a couple years of buying expensive custom-made shoes, they decided to perform surgery on my feet. Turned out I had extra muscle growth along with something else I don't recall at the moment. My podiatrist told me he submitted a scholarly article on it. May also have been genetic, as when my dad was 3, he developed an extra toe growing out of each one of his big toes. I actually know the name for this offhand, and it's called polydactyly. I've got the middle toes on both feet webbed. So did Stalin. Quack. When I was a teenager, I had just started working at the local Sears Auto Center Express lube shop, and on day 1 did a quick orientation and my first oil change. The manager walked away when he felt I was good to go, and the oil change went well. Fast forward a few days later, my manager had asked me to come into his office, and he explained that the oil filter I had used had one huge flaw. I didn't know what that was, and it turned out the filter was pressed on backwards into the filter can and it wouldn't allow oil to flow in, and it damaged the motor. They had to purchase a new motor for the person, and I still kept my job. He said it was a 1 in a million chance that it would have happened, and it did on my first oil change. I had the rarest type of synesthesia, lexical gustatory. It means I taste words. I was struck by lightning while talking on a landline. This was in the early 90s. Lightning struck through the telephone line and traveled through the handset to my ear. My parents drove me to the ER. I couldn't talk very well. My brain knew what I wanted to say, but my mouth didn't want to say it. I had a terrible stutter. My doctor told me that I had had a dose of good old-fashioned electroshock therapy. My speech was normal the next day, but I'd get a terrible headache whenever a thunderstorm comes through. I have an unknown type of autosomal dominant centronuclear myopathy. My type of it is so rare that they haven't even seen it before. Getting diagnosed was a multi-year struggle. They pretty much had to rule out everything else. It doesn't feel great to be in this club by myself. Countless blood draws, MRIs, CAT scans, and a biopsy and a genetic test. So far, it looks like my father and I are the only ones with it. Yay. As the researchers pointed out, this isn't really rare, just a type that hasn't really been seen in the population yet, meaning there is certainly more people out there, just not tested or diagnosed yet. In the future, I'll probably be 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000. Sorry to make everyone think I was 1 in a million. I'm allergic to the cold. Like, literally. I get intense hives, swelling, I pass out, and throw up. Doesn't even have to be freezing. Below 45 degrees without a jacket, and I can't do it. I have to carry an EpiPen with me in the event that I drink something too cold or have a severe reaction. Bought $3 worth of pong balls at one of those games at the state fair. I think it was 10 balls, and the grand prize is in the middle, and you have to land it in a small glass container. I was having fun and just decided to throw it by flicking my wrist in a weird way. It bounced around for a while, and landed right in the red glass container, which was the grand prize. Even the worker was surprised that I got it. Had to walk around the state fair with a giant Charmander plush toy after that. Not quite 1 in a million, but close enough. As a child, I had an extremely rare autoimmune disease. On top of having an extremely rare illness, I developed the rarer and most dangerous of the symptoms. My kidneys started shutting down. Most kids recover from this disease, but not always the ones with kidney issues. I was extremely lucky. I did not have to go on dialysis, and my kidneys eventually reached normal functioning levels. It took a decade to be completely cleared of the disease. My mother likes to call me a miracle child, not only because of this, but because she was not supposed to be able to have a kid due to health issues, and had several miscarriages before my stubborn butt decided to be born. Weird stuff. I have symmetric bilateral coloboma of the iris and retina. Essentially, my pupils are shaped like keyholes instead of circles. A single coloboma is pretty rare, double coloboma is even more rare, and double symmetrical, well, you get it. I have a very rare skin disease that only 1 in a million people get. I've been told that I'll probably never meet another person in my lifetime with it. Haley disease for those interested. For those asking, I was diagnosed by a team of dermatologists. They had to take a biopsy of one of my many outbreaks. A picture of that particularly horrible rash is currently in a medical journal, or so I've been told. Yes, it is a very painful disease. Yes, I get steroid injections for it. I also get Botox injections to control sweating and prevent some of my outbreaks. No, I don't know if you have this disease. You have to get a biopsy. Yes, it's inherited. My mother was a carrier, and I've been told my grandmother had the disease for more than half her life. Haley disease is a rare genetic disorder that is characterized by blisters and erosions, most often affecting the neck, armpits, skin folds, and genitals. The lesions may come and go, and usually heal without scarring. Sunlight, heat, sweating, and friction can often aggravate the disorder. The symptoms of Hailey-Hailey disease occur because of the failure of skin cells to stick together, resulting in the breakdown of affected skin layers. Hailey-Hailey disease occurs due to a mutation in a specific gene that creates a protein that is essential for the proper health of skin. The disorder becomes apparent after puberty, usually by the 3rd or 4th decade, but symptoms can develop at any age. I was born 1 pound and 6 ounces in 1998. Doctors said I had like a 15% chance of surviving or something like that. They also said that if I did survive, I would have been a vegetable. So months pass. Funny thing was, I came out of the hospital on the day I was due, came out in February, left the hospital in June. Well, I am still forming as a baby, and it's 20 years later and I'm alive and healthy. I can walk, talk, and all the normal things. Only thing really wrong with me is my right eye is hanging on a thread because of reasons, and I'm socially autistic. I guess that's 1 in a million. I was so freakishly allergic to ant and bee venom as a child that a single sting from a single little common black ant put me into anaphylactic shock. When my allergist was preparing to start immunotherapy for me, he found that the in-office lab equipment wasn't sensitive enough to measure the infinitesimally small amount of allergen with which to start my titration, so he had to send a sample of my blood to Johns Hopkins so that their lab could determine how much to give me. I did immunotherapy for several years to reach an immune response level at which it would be safe for me to basically exist in a non-frozen climate. Good news though, I'm good now. I've had a few run-ins with ants and wasps since my immunotherapy, and my body didn't freak out and shut down. And research indicates that if it hasn't done that after this long, I'm probably safe for maybe forever. I don't have EpiPens and I'm not overly afraid of ants or bees. To answer a few questions, I live in Florida. I'm not outdoorsy, but stinging things are everywhere. It is, in fact, the Australia of North America. No, my parents would not move me to the frozen tundra to be a nomadic reindeer herder at my behest. Little black ants do, in fact, sting. Several Lassia subspecies have stingers and venom. When an ant bites you, that's using their mandibles and does not deliver venom. When an ant stings you, that's using their butt needle and delivers the pain juice. Most ants do one or the other. Fire ants do both at the same time. I did some research a while back and found an academic paper that indicated that if I hadn't had a reaction after this many years, the likelihood that I ever would again is vanishingly rare. I wish I could find it again right now, but I'm already late getting ready for work. So if I find it later, I'll post it. I feel completely safe having a cell phone instead of an EpiPen. I was actually homeless for 4 years between 19 and 23 years old. As silly as it sounds, I used to earn some extra money at the time by helping around in a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. It was my biggest hobby when I was younger and was something I felt confident about. I also didn't have a passport or a bank account, so I couldn't get a normal job. I'm in the UK. Anyway, so at the time I was stuck not earning enough money, without a passport, a bank account, or a real job. In the UK, you won't get hired by 99% of companies if you don't have a passport to prove you have the right to work. So one day I got a phone call from a studio asking if I played Yu-Gi-Oh and would consider myself a geek, also if I wanted to be in a TV show. They said they would send me to another country as part of it. Being homeless, the biggest problems is being bored, so naturally I said yes, but told them I don't have a passport. No problem, we'll get you one straight away and pay for it ourselves. I ended up on a show called Geeks that you can still watch on Channel 4 OD. Because I got this passport, I was finally able to get a job, a bank account, and finally a house. Now I'm looking after my 10-month-old daughter who's playing while I type this. So Yu-Gi-Oh saved me from being homeless. I might be an anime character. TLDR, was homeless until a TV company gave me a passport allowing me to get a job and a house because I played Yu-Gi-Oh. This blew up more than expected, so here's some answers to some questions. How did you have a phone? I had a cheap brick phone that would run on battery for a week. Think old Nokias. I used to charge at my local library in Peckham, London. How did I help in Yu-Gi-Oh? I was a judge for the tournaments. They're a referee for the game. How did the TV company find out about you? I was a judge for the game. The TV show was looking for geeks with different hobbies, and they found out about Yu-Gi-Oh! After assuming a Google search, they found the person who ran my local tournament to recommend different players and people, and she recommended me. Why do you need a passport? So in the UK, you need a government picture ID and a national insurance number, like social security number, in order to prove you're allowed to work in the UK. I have migraines that cause me to go part or near completely blind, so I can't drive due to the risk. So I don't have access to a driver's license as ID, leaving me only with the passport. I'm getting some people who are a little doubtful that it could be so hard to get a job while homeless, or to get ID and are shocked it's taking me long to get out. What's important isn't what you know about the world right now. What's important is what I knew about the world as a 19-year-old that just left school. Think back to that age and honestly ask yourself how easy it would be to get a job without a bank, a home address, ID, or experience of anything. Of course now, as a 27-year-old, I'm armed with so much more knowledge to find a way out. I had 8 wisdom teeth. The dentist had never seen anything like it and called the whole office in to marvel at my teeth. Had pygmy glandular fever when I was 16. Nothing special about that. Had pneumonia a few months later, probably due to my weak immune system from the first disease, which caused my lungs to collapse, very unlikely for a 17-year-old. The hospital I was in couldn't do any more for me, so another hospital came with a rescue team of 8 people and a heart-lung machine, easymode. Very rare that hospitals have those that can be transported. The hospital only used it the second time and the first time successfully, to pick me up. They brought me to the other hospital. I was in a coma for a couple more days, but made it out of the hospital within 3 weeks after that, just before Christmas. A big newspaper wanted the story for Christmas miracles, but no thanks. I own a Lego minifigure called Mr. Gold. This particular minifig was to celebrate the 10th series of the Lego figurine line. They're sort of like grab bags. You can feel for them, but you don't know what minifigure you're really going to get. So, because they were celebrating, they thought it was a good idea to only make 5,000 of these. Anyways, when I was younger, and even now, I was really good knowing which figures they are simply by looking at the figure's pieces and feeling out those pieces. I really liked the minifigures because I thought they were really cool and unique, so I really wanted Mr. Gold, and me and my mom hunted for it for a long time, but after a while, I gave up. Then one day, I was at the Lego store and felt the distinct diamond piece and freaked out. Finding this figure was a downright fantasy. I'm 18 now and still want to relive 12-year-old me's pure joy as he opened the packaging. My dad once asked me for a quarter. I tossed it to him and it went directly into his shirt pocket. Guys, Dude Perfect is losing his mind right now. Doctors of Reddit, what's something you've had to tell a patient that you thought for sure was common knowledge? Have had to inform a few male patients that the condom only goes on the shaft and should not be pulled down to include covering of the testicles. How a shorter/fatter 5ml oral syringe held more volume than a skinnier and longer 1ml oral syringe. How does this hold more liquid when it's shorter? Also, I've seen almost every incorrect way to use an inhaler, upside down being fairly common. People taking birth control pills only on the days they have intimacy. I no longer assume anything as common knowledge. I'd rather have someone be offended that I explained something basic than to have something awful happen because I assumed the patient knew something. After putting a few stitches in a middle-aged guy's scalp, the family asked if he was okay. The attending joked that his brain was still inside. The family were stunned by this news. I, the medical student, spent the next half hour informing the family that the brain was inside the skull and that a person couldn't live without one. They thought that the brain was just a turn of phrase to reflect a person's common sense rather than an actual organ. Sort of the same as what they thought about the heart. I'm not a doctor, but I'm an ER nurse. I had a patient come in for an STD check. She was very upset and continued to tell me that she only had one partner. Progressing through my assessment, she further divulged that even if he was sleeping with other people, it shouldn't matter because he uses a condom every time and he makes sure to wash it thoroughly after every use. I asked what she meant when she said he washes it after every use. She explained that he washed the condom with hot water and soap before he used said condom again. I had to explain to her that condoms are a one-time use product. She had no clue. My dad is a family doctor in the States. A woman came in for a well baby check with their 6-month-old and she had what looked like chocolate milk in the baby's bottle, so he started explaining to her as kindly as he could that she shouldn't be giving her baby chocolate milk, at which point she interrupts him and says, "Oh, that isn't chocolate milk, it's coffee. He just loves it." If you're going to put it in your butt, make sure it has a flared base, or is attached to something you won't lose your grip on. Corollary, if you've already lost something in your butt, don't lie to the triage nurse and then medical team. While your story is usually amusing, we don't really care how it ended up in there. Pediatric nurse here. I've told more than one parent that their infant should not be drinking Dr. Pepper out of their bottle, or any other vessel for that matter. Viagra does not prevent STDs or pregnancy. Not a doctor, but a paramedic. During clinical time in the ER, 17-year-old came in with a bloody rectum/anus. Apparently, she wasn't wiping after using the bathroom and it was basically really bad diaper rash. So the nurse had to call social services and explain to this girl proper wiping. I'm a veterinary technician. I once had to explain to a client that the ticks she had been frantically trying to remove from her male dog's belly with tweezers were actually his nipples. I also told her she had an extremely well-behaved patient dog. Not a doctor, RN in the ICU. I've seen some really stupid people over the years, but a few weeks ago, a patient's family member got into a verbal altercation with me over the fact that I was trying to freeze his mother to death. He kept pointing to the digital thermostat displaying a temperature of 23 degrees Celsius. We're in the US, by the way. When I gently explained to him that 23 degrees Celsius is not at all cold, he just kept pointing to the display and shouting, "You don't think 23 degrees is cold? It's 23 freaking degrees in here!" and acting insane. After multiple attempts to explain to him what Celsius is by myself, the charge nurse, house supervisor, and security, we finally gave up and had him escorted out. He was a man in at least his late 30s who's graduated high school and had never heard of Celsius and Fahrenheit. He literally thought we were making it up in an attempt to conceal my efforts to freeze his intubated, critically ill mother to death. Slightly graphic warning. Another vet here. Dead bodies decompose. If you leave your dead dog I euthanized in the back of your car on the hottest day of the year, don't come crying to me when its belly fills with putrefying gases and bursts. Demanding I cover the costs of reupholstering your car might be considered a little rude as well. A hospital is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for medical emergencies. So the next time you have a stroke on Friday, come in on Friday and don't wait for the weekend to pass. A child cannot have inherited any genetic traits from someone the mother has previously been with. Only one man is the biological father. My wife and I were trying to get pregnant, and due to possible complications, we were talking to an obstetrician. Towards the end of the visit, he tells us in all seriousness, just so you guys know, you have to stop using condoms if you want to get pregnant. We just stare at him a bit and say, obviously? And he just shakes his head and says, you'd be surprised. There's been a few couples that really didn't realize that. My grandmother was the ignorant one getting in explaining. She was 18 and in labor with her first child. She was the kind of lady to wear pants in the late 40s. The nurse looked her up and down and told her to put on the labor clothes. So she took off her top and bra and got on the bed. The nurse is really confused. Take off your pants too. Why? It comes out my belly button, right? Asked Grandma. No, darling. It comes out the way he came in. ER nurse here had to explain to a 27-year-old female that this bleeding she was having for a week every month was normal and why. She had 2 children, by the way. My mother is a nurse and has been for over 25 years. The only story of hers that makes me sick is the story of a man who could not afford Viagra. So he reasoned his cock gun should do the trick, right? It'd stay in there and keep him ready. So he put the tip of the gun in his urethra and filled himself up. Long story short, don't do that. Don't, for Christ's sake, ever do anything even remotely like that. Podiatrist buddy told me this one. Lady has to have foot amputated and is given waiver forms to sign pre-op. Buddy asks if she needs time to think about it. She's very nonchalant and doesn't seem to care much what they do. He gets suspicious and probes a bit as to why she's not more concerned. She says she gets that they have to operate and it's okay because the foot will grow back. He then has to explain she's not a salamander. Things get a bit more serious. Okay, but like salamanders are cool? Imagine if we could regrow our limbs like salamanders. That'd be sick. Not a doctor, but a nutritionist. I work with a lot of different patients and I have tons of stories about food stupidity. Had a lady have bariatric surgery. Your stomach gets surgically stapled smaller. And her mother kept trying to force her to eat real food the day of the surgery when she was on a liquid diet. She would eat it, puke, rip her stitches out, repeat. We had to ban the mother from seeing her because she would literally blackmail and guilt trip this poor lady into eating a whole pizza, barf it all up because her poor post-surgery stomach couldn't handle it, and end up ripping out stitches and causing enormous pain because her mother was positive that she would die if she was on a liquid diet for a couple days. Another lady I was seeing for clinicals was diabetic, and she would come in every week with stupid high blood sugar levels, 250 to 260-ish. Not knowing why they were so high, she kept a record of everything she ate, and all of her food intake seemed fine. One day, her husband came with her, which was weird, and he ninja slipped me a note while shaking my hand. It read, "Ask her about the Quick Trip slushies. She doesn't believe me that they have sugar in them." So I asked her if she was having any soda, lemonade, tea, ice cream, shakes, or slushies, and she told me, like a light bulb had gone off in her head. Well, I have been drinking about 3 of the 48-ounce Quick Trip slushies every day for a while now. They're just so good. And they aren't food or drink, they're slushies. So they don't have any sugar in them, and I don't need to record them. It was so hard to convince her that those are so full of sugar it isn't even funny. But seriously, 3 a day on a type 2 diabetic? It was one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. A nursing home called 911 for a patient who was having difficulty breathing. When we arrived, a PA was standing in front of the patient, vigorously fanning the old lady with her hands. She looked at us and said, "I'm giving her some oxygen because we couldn't find a portable O2 tank," and keeps flapping her arms. Remember, this is a physician assistant, probably making $100,000 a year. I informed her that she could stop now, and my partner and I did our best to wait until we were outside to burst out laughing. Going off on a side tangent here, some people don't handle stress well. I volunteer as an emergency first responder, but one of the funniest cases I've seen of was out of uniform in an airport. A larger gentleman who suffered from COPD had taken a 6-hour flight. Upon getting through security, he had collapsed and was having difficulty breathing. The first person on scene to help the guy was a firefighter. I was second on scene, younger and smaller than the firefighter. I'm 6'3" and not skinny. This guy was just huge. So I'm letting him take lead as I run through making sure EMS is on the way, checking this guy's vitals, stabilizing his head and neck, big guy, went from conscious to unconscious quickly and fell straight down, and getting a history from his family. In the meantime, the firefighter's kinda starting to panic a little. He may have been new, or just the fact that he was out of uniform and not expecting it threw him. Either way, as the man regains consciousness and I start running through a quick GCS test, which involves me and the gentleman talking to each other and treating for shock, the firefighter tries to retake the guy's vitals. He fails to find a pulse. Understand at this point I am communicating with the patient. He's not completely lucid, but he is speaking to me and groaning. Having failed to find a pulse, the firefighter assumes this gentleman is in full-on cardiac arrest and begins to attempt to apply an AED to his chest. I say attempt because, along with being large, this gentleman was somewhat hairy. Now, in any first aid course for anyone that involves teaching one to use an AED, one of the first things you cover is that the razor in the kit is there in case you need to shave someone. The firefighter, having failed to realize that talking probably means the patient isn't in cardiac arrest and that he is having trouble getting a pulse because the patient is larger, then fails to shave the guy's chest. This leaves the patient with the 2 contact pads hanging off of his chest hair, but very much not in any way contacting his skin, while I've just started to realize what the firefighter was trying to do. At that point, fortunately, an older woman arrives and identifies herself as a trauma nurse, who are, by the way, just about the best people to have on your side if something like this happens. She tells him to go talk to the family, takes lead, and everything goes smoothly from then until the airport medical folks show up and take over. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble not laughing the whole time at the image of the firefighter staring intently at an AED that can't possibly give him a reading on the condition of the now conscious and lucid patient. TLDR, even people who should know better sometimes lose it under stress. Had a lady measure her baby's temperature by preheating the oven and putting one hand in front of it while the other hand was on the baby's forehead. She told the nurse her baby's fever was about 250 degrees. Lady, you either think you're the Human Torch or you don't understand how conduction works. I had an old lady come in with a massive bleed in her brain. She was pretty much gone. I had to explain to her tearful son that there was nothing we could do. He said that he loved his mama and he'd give anything for her. So he asked us to give her his brain for a brain transplant. I actually was left speechless for a minute and then had to spend another 20 minutes explaining why that was not possible. Mom brought her kids to the ER after they ate all of their Halloween candy because they had tummy aches. They were still eating Reese's peanut butter cups when they were in the exam room. I had to explain to her that they need to cut back on the candy and she looked at me like I had 3 heads. For almost a month, my friend had random pains. Bruises started showing up randomly. He looked ashen, and what we first thought was him being lazy was actually him not having any energy. Finally, his girlfriend got him to agree to go to the doctor, who sent him to the ER, where it took several doctors to figure out what was wrong, either because none of them had actually seen it in real life, or they didn't think someone could be that stupid. Quote the doctor, "You have scurvy. Eat a freaking orange." Ooh, I've got another one. Inhaler technique. So we're told to always show a patient how to take an inhaler if they are new to them, and that we should check technique every so often. Yeah, you think. How hard can it be? Well, my senior once noticed that a patient was getting repeat prescriptions for an inhaler every week rather than every month. We brought her in to find out why. Oh, it just doesn't seem to work very well. I press it up to 50 times and it doesn't help. We were in shock over this. Salbutamol inhalers taken in excess, we're talking like 10 puffs taken in an asthma attack, can give you a thumping headache, a tremor, and a dry mouth. How is she taking 50 and not noticing? We asked to see the technique. Yeah. Turns out she was spraying it onto her chest. Internal face palms were had, and we educated her on how to take it properly. A PhD isn't that kind of doctor. Please don't show me that rash. During paramedic school, my teacher was a PA who told us a story of a lady that came into the clinic he was working at. She said she didn't feel well, nothing but general fatigue and not feeling right. He had the nurse do a standard set of vitals and a blood glucose. Her glucose was extremely high, so he goes in to talk to her. He asked, "Has anyone ever told you that you have diabetes?" She replied, "Yeah, a doctor said that I had that once and I took some medication for a couple weeks and felt better." He then had to explain to her that diabetes doesn't go away after some medication. I had the opposite happen to my wife. She was pregnant and had a thyroid nodule. We were concerned about how removal could affect the pregnancy due to changes in hormone levels and anesthetic during the surgery. We stated this concern quite clearly and in great detail. His response was that he will be operating on the neck and that it was nowhere near the baby. Thanks for answering a question we never had and ignoring ours. He was really pushing for surgery before delivery. We did not see him again. I work in a hospital lab. Quite a few years ago, there was a patient who was on our schedule for a semen analysis from one of our fertility doctors. The between the lines here is the patient was having some fertility problems. Patient presents us with a cup of urine. We explain that we need a semen sample, not a urine one. Confused why his first sample was rejected, he goes back to the private bathroom at the end of the hall. About half an hour later, he comes back with another urine sample, and that's when I literally had to have both a birds and bees talk with a man in his mid-30s and clue him in on the world of self-pleasure. This has actually happened twice now in my 8 years, and I found out about another guy when I was talking to my manager about it. The second time, I had a few thoughts. I could save these guys thousands of dollars by explaining how to have intimacy properly. Somehow, it never came up in the office that the wrong fluid is being used. I had to explain to a frantic mother that non-traumatic vaginal bleeding with abdominal cramps is normal in a 12-year-old. I tried to throw her a hint when I asked when the girl's last menstrual cycle was. She merely replied in hysterics, "She doesn't have menstrual cycles! She's only 12! I'll leave the diagnosis to your imagination. I'm a CNA at a nursing home. We got a new resident in and she had a huge bed sore near her tailbone region that had become infected and abscessed to the point that you probably could have fit a Coke can inside the opening. It had to be cleaned, packed, and have a wound pump attached to it every 12 hours. Turns out before she came to us, her family didn't think she needed any at-home help, so they would go over in the morning, get her up, bathe, dressed, put a Pop-Tart on the table for her, get her in her wheelchair, and go about their day. She was incontinent and would sit in the chair for 12 to 15 hours a day covered in her own urine and feces until they came back, wiped her off, and put her back in her bed for the night. Sitting all day in your own filth, it turns out, leads to bed sores. The day she was admitted to my facility, her family, my administrator, and everyone were all talking in a room. They had introduced us and let her know I'd be taking care of her at night from now on. She whispered to me that she needed to go to the bathroom, and I had to kick out my boss and her family because her son insisted that she can just hold it. She was never able to get over the raging infection in her wound, and it eventually killed her. It was one of those situations where I honestly wish I could have looked them in the face and told them, "You know you're the one that killed your mother, right? You killed her." Just as an update, yes, we tried to turn them in for elder abuse, but she was actually still sound of mind and realized what we were going to do. And so, she recanted her story and said she had never told us anything like that. She didn't want to see her son in jail for what he did to her, so she went to her death telling people things had just gotten out of hand and she was too weak. Paramedic here. Have informed numerous people that pouring Gatorade into the unresponsive diabetic's mouth is not a good idea. What you should do, call an ambulance. If they have a glucagon emergency kit, follow its instructions. Do not put anything in, on, near, or around their face. I've heard the powdered sugar and gums, etc., but if you expect an ambulance within 20 minutes, just lie them on their side and wait. Drink the Gatorade yourself. You deserved it. You just saved their freaking life. My mother who worked as a pediatric nurse. She had a mother whose child was putting on a startling amount of weight. This was bad since the patient's mother was obese and had diabetes, and they wanted to control weight gain for baby. So they went through the feeding schedule. Baby was due for a bottle during the checkup. The mother whips out a bottle during appointment. My mom is startled to see the milk is bright pink. She asks, why is the milk bright pink? The child's mother explains that her kid prefers the milk if it has strawberry quick mixed in and drinks more milk. The mom didn't get the connection between quick and weight gain. TLDR, don't feed your child the betas. It makes them fat from the start. IDOC here. Just today, I had to tell a patient that no, you should not attempt to continue wearing a contact lens that was dropped in the toilet. This is like a worse version of that eyeball licking trend from 2013, which actually turns out was a hoax. In a free medical clinic, I had to tell a mother that she should be brushing her 4-year-old's teeth. The daughter came because her throat hurt. After opening her mouth and using a tongue depressor to see her throat, the daughter squirmed like 4-year-olds are prone to do, and the tongue depressor hit her gums. Pus flowed everywhere, and the child wound up having to be put on penicillin before having every last tooth pulled due to severe infection. You should start brushing your infant's teeth as soon as they start teething, and do a gentle gum massage with the baby toothbrush before that. Use safe-to-swallow toothpaste before the child is 10. Let the child brush their own teeth as soon as they are able for practice, and then have an adult brush them at a 45-degree angle toward the gums in small circles. Children should be supervised brushing their teeth until they're at least 12 or longer if necessary. This occurred in Nicaragua, quite far from any major city, and wasn't reported because the mother did follow-up and kept the appointment for extractions. The thought of brushing her daughter's teeth simply never arose. Before modern toothbrushes were invented, people used bones, porcupine quills, sticks, and chew sticks. The ancient Romans had toothbrushes as well. Yes, you should brush your pet's teeth. Pet toothpaste only, no fluoride. No, I didn't murder the mother. She was provided with 6 months' worth of dental supplies for both of them and thoroughly educated on dental hygiene. Alright, now for the old switcheroo. My ex-mother-in-law was a pediatrician. However, her education was all from the 60s and 70s in Cold War Poland, and she hadn't practiced as a pediatrician for 30 years when our doctor was born. Like a lot of first-time parents, we read all of the books, and the vast consensus at the time was that the only thing babies need is mother's milk. So we set ourselves up for that, and the baby is thriving after a couple of weeks with our doctor telling us everything is fine. Mother-in-law comes to visit, and of course, we're doing everything wrong. We can't hold the baby right, we're being too attentive, we're not being attentive enough, she's too warm, she's too cold. I think you expect a certain amount of that, but then she starts insisting on giving the baby sugared black tea in a bottle. I'm not the smartest guy on the planet, but I'm smart enough to let the wife and her mom settle this between them. Lots of screaming back and forth. Showed her the literature from our doctor about nursing, all the references in the baby books, pulled down a couple of recent research articles, but the crazy old battle axe didn't give up. Finally, I caught her after we foolishly left her alone with the baby for a couple of minutes, trying to force her to take a bottle with tea in it. She yelled at my wife, "In a week, I will go back home and then you can do whatever you want with the baby." In a level voice, I told her, "That's what you don't seem to understand. We can do whatever we want with the baby right now." RN. Not an MD, but here's the story. Patient was a newly diagnosed diabetic who needed to be taught how to inject insulin. So the diabetes educator did the good old routine of taking an orange, drawing up insulin, then injecting it into the orange, then made the patient repeat it. Patient goes home, comes back in a week, and his blood sugar is out of control. They ask him if he's been taking his insulin, and he goes, "Of course." So they decide to ask him to demonstrate how he injects insulin. The patient goes, "Sure, I just need an orange." At this point, I started face-palming hard because I know where this one is heading. But of course, they got him an orange and a vial of insulin with the syringe. So the guy draws up the insulin correctly, takes the syringe, injects it into the orange, and then says, "And then I eat the orange." At this point, I had to walk out because I nearly lost myself right there. I once had a patient with a cancer diagnosis completely depressed about not being able to see their family anymore. I was confused because I had spoken with this individual's spouse and extended family who seemed supportive. There wasn't any indication of family problems. It turns out this individual thought genetic and family history had meant something similar to contagious, leading them to the conclusion that one should stay away from loved ones lest it be spread through the family. That was one clarification I was so happy to give. To those wondering how such a misunderstanding is possible, keep in mind that we ought not to judge. Not everyone has the benefit of a good education, nor is everyone part of a generation and culture that has always had medicine and science in their lives. Other times, language and jargon could be a barrier to understanding. I was not the physician that failed to communicate the issues effectively, but we were all glad that at least his problem could be easily dealt with. What disgusting secrets does your employer keep from its customers? The fajitas sizzle because we pour oil and water on a hot plate, not because we grilled anything. My whole life is a lie. Former employer was charging clients for a WAN backup solution that wasn't even running. I was still actively developing it when I quit. Client called up and asked to see the records of the backup. I said it wasn't running and that we didn't have any to my knowledge. Client flips out, calls boss flips out at me for not lying. Screw that noise. I used to work in a major movie theater and we would recycle hot dogs. Basically, if the links were on the spinning rack all day and didn't get purchased, they would be thrown in a bucket and refrozen. We poked a fork hole in one to see how long it would stay in rotation. 7 freaking days. Worked for a self-storage place in Rocklin, California. They made every customer sign a lease agreement that said that you wouldn't hold them responsible if your unit was broken into and things were stolen. I found out that we had 7 to 8 burglaries a year. The owners would get sued, but they would always get off because they produced the lease agreement in court and the judge would dismiss the case. One day, I came in from vacation to pick up my paycheck, and I found the owner and the manager loading up a truck with the contents from a unit that wasn't theirs. I went around the corner to an area where the fence allowed me to look in, and saw that they went to another storage space, cut off the lock, and proceeded to load up the truck with a telescope, big screen TV, and some power tools. I came back the next day and asked one of my coworkers. He told me that the owners of the storage space would sell the stuff they stole from renters, and that the manager and the owner did the same thing with another property that they owned in Granite Bay. I quit to go back to Sac State. I called the Rocklin cops to tell them what the owners were doing, and they said that there was nothing they could do unless they were caught in the act. Tim Hortons Smile Cookies. Pay an extra $1 for a chocolate chunk cookie with a smile drawn on it. All proceeds go to local charity. Unfortunately, store owner would just go into the system, void all cookie sales, and replace them with regular chocolate chunk cookie sales. A small business owner for whom I worked several years ago kept deducting the employees' health insurance premiums but never sent the payments in to the carrier. After 2 to 3 months of this, our insurance was canceled right before one lady's teenage son was in a fairly serious car accident. She finds out at the emergency room, during what is of course an extremely stressful time, that she has no insurance whatsoever when she and her dependents have been fully covered. The next day she went into his office, very upset, to find out what happened. He gave his usual song and dance and made excuses for not having been able to send it in, and this normally mild-mannered lady picked up a stapler and threw it at him. He wasn't even injured. While doing that was, of course, unacceptable, I totally understood her frustration with this weasel. He spent thousands of dollars a month of company money, coding it to company expenses, at Sam's Club on groceries and big-ticket items for his house, on top of his already generous salary. Then to top it off, he actually took her to court for the stapler throwing incident. After hearing the story, the judge dismissed the weasel's case and made a comment to the effect that if he were in the same position as her, he probably would have done the same thing. Used to sell cars at a major dealership. The unofficial sales contest was to see how much over MSRP they could sell the car for by confusing the customer on the price with payments and financing, manipulation of trade value, and sometimes outright fraud, like promising manufacturer rebates then not applying them. The winner, quote-unquote, for the 2 months I was there was over by $10,000, selling a car that should have been about $20,000 for over $30,000. The sad part is, the customer might never even know because they still got the payment they wanted. Please do yourself a favor and don't shop solely based on payments, and if you are financing, then make sure you are aware what the final selling price of the car is. There is a major difference between $400 a month at 60 months at 0% interest and $400 per month at 84 months at 0.9%. I used to work at Frisch's as a hostess, busser, drive-thru attendant. That place was filthy and corrupt as heck. No one in the kitchen wore gloves, and the cooks loved making people eat old food or food that had been dropped on the disgusting floors. The manager loved to steal the waitress's tips and blame the customers or the sketchy-looking bussers. The most corrupt thing the awful manager did while I was there was around Christmas time. He would take $100 out of each of the new/younger employees' cash drawer, call your parents saying that their kids stole the money and they needed to be brought in to be questioned. When I went to work the next day, I found out the same crap happened to a few of the others. We all got angry and snagged the key that locked the box to the camera controls, rewinded to the following day, and watched until we saw the jerk start doing his thing. Every single one of us reported him. He got insta-fired. It was glorious. TLDR, Frisch's is gross and my old manager was a corrupt jerk. I worked for a vet in Vancouver and I ran a whole month of raffles, nail cuttings for donations, and pet pics with Santa for the SPCA. When we added up the last of the money from the month, I put it in the safe. The practice owner's wife deposited the money and bought herself some new Chanel makeup. What the frick? I quit in disgust. We have a roach problem, and gnats are everywhere. Customers can see the gnats flying around the salads, fruits, and pies we have out, but I guess it doesn't disgust them enough to not come back. More than a few times, customers have complained about bugs in their drinks that ended up there after they died in our ice machine. The worst was a live cockroach in someone's salad that was on the fork as they went to take a bite. Whole cooked turkey breasts and roast beefs have been dropped on the floor and served without any of the managers and employees giving two craps. I've realized most restaurants are so much more dirty than shown, but I've eaten out my whole life. I guess my consolation is that I'm probably building up some immunities to all the ickies out there. I used to work for a local children's charity where a good majority of the money was skimmed to pay for the owner's for-profit business. I worked for a popular national pet store chain. We told our customers that we got our puppies from, quote, reputable breeders and not puppy mills. We got them from puppy mills, and I can't express how many came in on the back of a large, pitch-dark freight truck, malnourished, scared, and sick. We also adopted the cute kittens from the local shelters and charged customers outrageous amounts of money, most of whom just felt bad for the kittens. Don't support national chain pet stores that sell puppies that do not come from local shelters, folks. If you want a dog or a cat, then please adopt. Or find a stray, take it to a vet and adopt him or her. Also, donate whatever you can to local shelters. Food, toys, beds, money, etc. They could really use it. I just want to say that if you have ever worked at a water park, it will turn you off of visiting any kind of public pool or park for the rest of your life. The things we pulled out of those filters, man. No. Just pour so many chemicals into the water that literally nothing can live in it and call it a day. Macy's doesn't donate anything to charities. They practically force their employees to and claim it as company donation. I worked at Dairy Queen. The collection box supporting children with cancer hanging out in the drive-thru window was a discontinued charity. My manager pocketed all the donations. Disgusting in a different sense. Back when I was a warehouse manager for a major office supply chain, one of my duties every month was to gather items from our inventory that were selected by corporate to be donated to local charities. All items would be collected, scanned, placed on pallets, and loaded onto the trucks to be delivered to the charity distribution center. After a few months, I started to notice that some of the donation items that should have been shipped out mysteriously ended up missing or being used in my general manager's office. I later discovered that on the days that the donation items were collected, my manager would send me out for lunch and revert the scans on whatever donation item he desired in order to keep it for himself. I eventually caught him in the act as I returned early from lunch, and needless to say, he was not able to come up with a good excuse. Instead, he insisted that I take my pick of whatever I wanted from the pallet. I was so disgusted that I immediately put in my 2 weeks notice during the busiest time of the year and filed a complaint with corporate. My last job, we held events and refilled premium liquor with house crap. And during events, charged consumption tabs with 100 plus people, extra shots and bottles that were never ordered so the event holder can pay for something never even used at the end of the night. And that's just scratching the surface. My boss refuses to hire anybody but white women, and he uses rubbing alcohol to wipe the expiration date off of product if it expires. He just puts it back on the shelf, including dairy product. I hate him. For reference, this was 9 years ago, so hopefully he's been fired at this point. This happened years ago, but I was a receptionist for a chiropractor for about 6 months. One day, our first appointment came in. I went in the back to look for him. I walked in on him screwing a coworker on the table, the same table the patients sometimes would lay face down on. I went back to the front and said, "He'll be with you in a couple minutes." God, I was disgusted. He was married with 2 young kids. I didn't work there long after that. Worked store security. There are peepholes above the ladies' changing rooms at several major retailers. Supposed to be for female security agents to monitor the dressing rooms, but we had no female security agents. Lots of creepy voyeurism / self-pleasure going on. Private company I no longer work for. The company list of vehicles included 2 4-wheelers, a Corvette, a Hummer II, a brand new Jeep, and oh right, a 20-foot fishing boat. Also frequently bought company furniture which he would then sell to himself. Government contractor and a weasel. Okay, this really took off and I'd like to clarify a few things. If you have a small business and your cars are company cars and your office is in your home, power to you. Starting a business takes a lot of work. The main problem that I had with this guy was his general selfish nature and lack of respect for anyone. I can't go into details, but there were 2 big projects going on at the company at the same time. One under the government was defense-based, the other which was an invention that he held the patents for was aerospace. He used every trick in the book to siphon the government contract money into the private project so that he could reap the benefits, generally treated employees like dirt, and was just such an unbelievable jerk. I recently worked for another government contractor and my boss there was nothing less than stellar. Using a throwaway. The company I worked for had to maintain a trust account where money owed to clients was kept and then they were paid out of it. There was a small lag of about 30 days between when the money came in and when it was sent to the client. This was a highly regulated industry. For more than 3 years, the company hadn't been paying their clients and had been fudging the books. I found this out when I was told to stop sending reports that showed clients were owed money. I pressed management and found out they had been lying to clients for well over 3 years. And one client was owed $1 million. I should also point out that in this particular industry, this client was in the top 3 in the nation. We're talking about thousands of companies owing tens of millions of dollars. I was instructed to lie to the clients until they were so fed up they threatened to sue the owners, then they would get paid. This was common knowledge in the business. It was openly discussed with customer service. Until I filed a formal complaint with the regulatory agency, none of the more than 100 employees had ever reported them. Not one. And I know why too. After I gave proof to the regulatory agency and quit, they swooped in and seized the company books. And all of my allegations were true. Instead of filing criminal charges against the executives involved, the regulatory agency just fined them and then made them pay back the missing money to the trust. No one was charged with the crime, no one lost their job, no one was put on probation. Absolutely nothing happened to those responsible, and the only consequence is that they have to have regular audits. Screw the government. I worked for a gelato shop that made us dig through the so-called recycling bins to fish out used plastic cups and spoons to wash and give to new customers. Even if the spoons had bite marks from other customers and were coated in chewing gum, we were told to wash them up and only had to throw them out if they were really unpresentable, because these things are expensive. Furthermore, all the other stuff in the recycling bin that people so good-heartedly placed there, yeah, all of it got thrown in the dumpster. Customers ate it up and told us regularly how glad they were that we were a green business who cares about the environment enough to recycle. It didn't take long before I just couldn't keep doing this with a clean conscience, and I turned them into the health inspectors, who were obviously horrified that this was happening. About 2 months later, I got laid off and the business closed its filthy doors forever. They leave sites like Reddit unblocked just to see who is slacking and fire them. One of the few benefits of performance-based jobs is that as long as you're getting your crap done, you can throw that right back into their faces. A few years ago, was working as a call center drone, and the boss of my boss sent me an email regarding the amount of non-work-related internet usage from my computer. I just sent him a metric spreadsheet showing that I was, by far, his most productive employee. Didn't even write anything in the email. Never heard anything else about it. I worked as a supervisor at a water park, and just before inspection by the owner, the director had me go around the park and paint all the rusted metal silver to look like new. Some of those bolts were nearly rusted through and were crucial to the ride's construction. Valet here. I've seen a number of occasions in which rubbing compound was used to cover up mild to moderate scratches. Coworkers have stolen things out of cars, from spare change to a handgun on one occasion. If valet is an option, don't do it. Just want to add, I've never stolen anything out of someone's car. Also, yes, all valet companies are different, just like not all restaurants spit in your food. I valeted my car one time. I thought, nah, they won't steal my stuff. Wrong. They stole lots of stuff. I used to work at Victoria's Secret. We are required to refund and take back any used underwear as well as everything else in the store. It would then immediately go back on the sales racks even if it had obviously been worn. I showed my manager a used pair of pink panties that had a disgusting smell that resembled tuna, and she advised me to just spray perfume on it. I didn't quit immediately because I needed the money. Instead, I would grab a pair of scissors from the back and accidentally cut the ones that I knew had been used, so they had to damage them out and not sell them. I work in designer clothing retail. The clothes are quite expensive, and the assistants are required to only wear full-price garments. So we, the whole team, just pick clothes off the rack, wear them all day, including lunch and bathroom breaks, and at the end of the shift, replace the tags and put the clothes back on the shelf for the customers to buy at full price. I know I was grossed out my first day there. If you come into Geek Squad with a computer under warranty, we are required to at least perform a $70 diagnostic on the computer before sending it out for repairs. If viruses are detected, that price goes up to $190 for the removal. I have had to remove viruses from a client's laptop and then send the laptop off to get the hard drive replaced. Also, $30 RAM installations are per stick of RAM. Seriously. One time our department was doing poorly in sales, so they brought in a specialist to give us an after-hours training session. He opened up with, if anyone is stupid enough to walk through those doors looking for a repair, they deserve to be charged $189 for it. I hated that place. In the store I work at, the warehouse is a complete fire hazard. The electrical boxes are screwed, and things get thrown on them all the time. In the way it's set up, if there was a fire, we'd be boned. There's wood by all the ceiling sprinklers, which would absorb most of the water, and pretty much all our fire extinguishers are several years past expiration. I'm highly considering calling a fire marshal. We can see you. I look after instant photo booths remotely. I see all your stupid faces, all of them, every day. I changed the name of a sushi roll from the Ultimate Roll to the Miami Heat Roll and raised the price to $17. Instantly became the best seller. That's not disgusting. That's marketing. Kudos. And this happens all the time. It's genius, not horrible. Take a look at what bars do. They'll have a special drink in which they have taken another drink and renamed it for double the price. After graduation, one of my roommates from undergrad went on to the University of Texas at Austin to do a master's degree in advertising. At first, he was super excited because the program there at UT was the best of its kind in the country, and he really liked Austin. However, by the end of it, he had totally changed his outlook on advertising and actually ended up going into a different industry. Apparently, his last semester there, the students in his program had to do an internship with a real company and help them come up with an advertising campaign. One of his friends at the program was really excited because he had gotten his internship with Jack Daniels. However, the view on advertising was completely shattered when his bosses at Jack Daniels literally told the guy to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and figure out what they would have to do to get those people drinking again. I once worked for a small retirement home that was owned by a church. I was the night watchman, and during the night, I could smell the odor of feces wafting down the halls. Everyone could. And the nurses at the nurse stations would typically wait until their mandatory rounds times to deal with it. So they basically let residents lay in their fecal matter. I'd say about 10% of nurses actually give a dang about the residents. All the other ones are just there to get paid. I will never go into a nursing home. Okay, as somebody who's worked in elder care for a while, let me explain. There is no such thing as truly great elder care in a retirement home. Unless you pay a crapload of money or go into a 24-hour facility in Thailand or the like, because there you get one-on-one care. There's decent care, where the patient's basic needs are met and they're cared for the best that the understaffed nurses can manage. And then there's awful care, where the old people are lucky if they get their diaper and urine bottles changed more than once a day. It's not possible to give people with dementia or impaired bodies all the time that is necessary when you're understaffed and underpaid and are barely able to rush through the important stuff that needs to be done. You've got women and men crapping themselves at least 3 times a day, and if you're really unlucky, it's the same person every time, and you run out of clothes for them to wear and stick them in a nightshirt, and that is, of course, the first day in 3 months that the relatives decide to visit and get angry because why is their mother, father, or uncle in bed before tea time? Which is all fine. It happens. You deal with it and move on. But every time you need to change somebody or clean somebody or help somebody to the toilet, it throws you back between 10 minutes and half an hour, and that's time that some other patient would have needed. And what you can't finish isn't picked up by your colleagues because they're equally behind. Because you're 5 people for 35 patients and they all need at least 3 hours of your time, which is 2.5 more hours than you can give them. If you're lucky, you gave everybody the right pills and the right food and the right kind of diaper so that they won't get open sores on their butt. And if you miss something ultra necessary, you better hope the next shift catches it. Because if not, it's you on the line, and the excuse Mrs. X pooped her pants and put her hands down her underwear and smeared it on the wall of the hallway and I had to do damage control is not going to fly with anybody. And let's not even get started on what happens when a medical emergency happens, because instead of running to the MRSA infected patient who's been in hospital 3 times in the last 2 months and has been dying for even longer, you walk slower and are relieved when they're dead, because now they won't have to slowly wither away in pain. I worked overnight dairy at Walmart for a few years after I moved, had 7 years total with the company, and hated every minute of it. So in the dairy, we often get returns, stuff that has been left out in the store, and it's our job to put it back up. No thought is given to how long these things have been left out. They're put into a cart and wheeled into the cooler. It doesn't matter if it's a gallon of milk that has been sitting out 5 minutes or 5 hours. It goes back into the cooler and probably back on the shelf. This is done in the name of expediency, which is what drives every policy at Walmart. Things don't get done right, they get done fast. So with milk, if a dairy employee finds it outside the cooler, it probably goes on a return pallet, because we know better than to put room temperature milk back in the cooler, and the store gets a refund on milk we send back to the milk company. Not so with regular employees, who, as they are trained, put it in a basket, wheel it into a cooler, and hand it off to the next guy, who probably is getting crap from his manager to get this stuff back on the shelf. Eggs? Eggs come in with general freight. They don't do returns on eggs. Once again, if a dairy employee picks them up, they probably get ditched in the giant bin of milk, eggs, flour that sits outside the cooler and ferments and smells terrible, but at least it's a good 5 feet from the candy bins, so it's not like any cross-contamination is possible, and never see the shelf. However, same thing as the milk. It could be sitting out for a week. It'll get put on a cart and wheeled back to a cooler, and someone will yell at someone else until it gets put back on the shelf, because nobody likes getting yelled at. While working there, I came down with food poisoning on at least 3 occasions, none of which I was allowed to go home. I walked out on the 3rd after I puked in a mop bucket, told my manager about it, and then found out that mop water, which was probably a day old in the first place, was used to mop the cooler because nobody ever told the employee on duty to change the water. This is ignoring their terrible policies regarding how they treat employees and train management. Don't buy food at Walmart because it might be cheap, but you're getting what you pay for. Ex-cons of Reddit. What's the worst thing that happened to you while doing your time? Serious replies only, and some pretty messed up stuff ahead, so fair warning. Did 7 in Pennsylvania State Prison. Saw a guy who was accidentally cleared by psych to be in general population go out to yard to try to cut his own head off with the razor wire. It was morning yard, not a lot of people out, and he sprinted towards the fence as soon as he got out there. We all thought, oh crap, we've never seen someone try to get over these forests of razor wire, but then this guy turns around with his back right up against the fence, cops coming from 3 directions yelling into their radios, and he loops a circle of razor wire around his neck and starts sawing. A waterfall of blood. Cops froze, everyone froze. That was really unexpected. They told us he lived, but screw me if I know how. Since you're asking, it happened at SCI Somerset, down in the lower yard. Yes, most of the razor wire is up on top of the fence, but there's a single run about 8 feet up the face of the fence, maybe to just discourage you from testing out the rest of it. He found this one section in the corner of the yard where the fence makes a bend, where that run was sagging down enough he could reach up and grab it. I always thought the pain reflex of holding on to razor wire would have made him stop, but nope. The craziest part is that prison can be months and months of literally the same thing over and over, like everything's painted the same color, then that guy is over there trying to cut his head off. Oh wait, huh? Like that. And prison doctors suck so hard. Probably gave him ibuprofen and sent him on to the hospital. He did it because he was crazy. The first day I was assigned to a new unit after being sentenced, DUI 90 days. I got put in a 5-man cell. It wasn't my first time locked up and had been in the jail a few weeks, so I wasn't too nervous. The guys were cool to me all evening. All 4 had done time before in much worse prisons. They were all playing cards and I didn't know the game, so I sat on my bunk reading. They started off saying weird, cryptic gay stuff, random stuff regarding Vaseline and who was cute on the block, etc. It ramps up over the course of an hour, then they start playing strip poker. Meanwhile, I've been hearing every word they say and studiously ignoring it. They got bored of being subtle and began saying awful stuff about screwing each other. I ignore everything, while secretly getting scared that they're going to do something to me. Eventually, all 4 got up, shirtless, and they trapped me on my top bunk and started grabbing at me. I yelled, "What the heck?" and they collapsed in laughter and spent the next 48 hours telling everyone who'd listen. TLDR, new guy in 5-man cell, they pretend they're gonna gangbang me. I suppose seeing people getting taken advantage of all the time and then not caring was the worst. New guys coming in and getting ripped off on trades and stuff. People with social/developmental issues just getting their food taken from them. Also, the psychology of people without goals gets weird. What was worst was just becoming part of that world. There are so many people there that have their rights taken away from them on a regular basis and don't care anymore. They choose to place value on being able to make others fear them. They stop thinking about the world beyond the walls and just get all wrapped up in the weird culture of the place. There was a day I was feeling proud of myself because I was running around organizing contraband trades, setting up poker games, and owning things like hardcover books and the only dice in the place. In that moment of pride, I realized I started to lose my mind. It's honestly hard to remember the months in there because most of the time, nothing's freaking happening. Nothing. You've read until you can't stand it. You've slept all you can. You can't play cards because your cellie is sleeping. So you stare at the ceiling and wait. It's so weird to realize you're doing the equivalent of time out for months. You're not waiting for 5 minutes, not waiting for 5 hours. You're waiting for a day that is months away. Just waiting. TLDR, it's like being in a DMV with a bunch of idiots and your number isn't up until next January. A user reminded me of the other thing that was awful on the human psyche. You're not really a person in there. You might have people that care about you on the outside, but they're still living their lives. The guys you play cards with are just trying to pass time, just like you. The officers don't care. You're just another pain in their neck. You just wear the same linen pajamas every day and just exist. 12 months on the inside. Very first day in prison. Very first day. I was in line for supper and this big guy comes up behind me, squeezes my butt and whispers in my ear, "Are your panties wet?" Scared crapless, I turned around and the guy jumped back and said in a friendly tone, "Oh, my mistake, mate. I thought you were someone else," and left the line. I still laugh about it to this day, but during the time it messed with me. Actually, he was a big solid who did honestly mistake me for his boy. I did 3.5 years in Texas prisons. I believe that the worst story I can recall was my first full day in a state jail facility, used as a transition center for up to 2 years before one is sent to a real prison in Texas. A guy came up to me asking if I smoked cigarettes. I didn't, but thought, why not? So he told me to head to the gym when that time came later that afternoon. We went to the gym and fired up a cigarette while we walked around the basketball court. As we were walking around the court, we approached the universal gym machine where a variety of people were using the various pieces to work out. The guy who offered me the cigarette advised me to follow him to the other side of the basketball court and to stay away from the universal gym. A few minutes later, a guy sat down and leaned back to do some bench press when 4 guys grabbed him, one on each arm and one on each leg. 2 other guys pull out cans of chili, or refried beans as both were available, in socks and proceed to hammer the guy in the face. The guy at the bench press had his face completely caved in. All I could think was, what have I gotten myself into? I also recall one other time when I was at the pre-release facility at the Beto unit where a guy had his face cut up with a box cutter and his throat slit over $20. The guy who died even had about $40 worth of cigarettes on him when he died. I never had anything happen to me directly per se. There were a few fights I got into over various things, usually disrespect. Processing into LA County Jail just after the first showers. Everybody is lined up to proceed to the next stage of processing. We were told to leave our towels in a pile on the floor and step forward when your name is called. One Hispanic fellow was called but did not speak any English. He was still carrying his towel. The deputy commanded him to stop and leave his towel in the pile. He did not respond. One deputy used his taser on the dude while 2 others dropped knees on him. The guy was rolling on the floor screaming apologies in broken English and Spanish. The guy received 1 warning. A few of us tried asking other Hispanics to inform him of the rule before we got to the deputies, but no further effort was made. I realize this isn't the worst tale on this post, just goes to show that violence happens for totally silly reasons in jail/prison. Been in that shower line before. Nuts to butts, they scream at you. Smells like balls, sweat, and hangover. Worst imaginable place on earth. I remember I was housed in Old County, a dingy, cockroach-infested, overcrowded, dirty section of LA County. You could wait up to 5 days just for a bunk, just sleeping on a concrete floor, eating bologna sandwiches. No blankets, no pillow, nothing. Once my bunk was available, they took me upstairs with 10 other people in the gang module. The cells are tiny, built to fit 2 inmates that pack 6 to 7 guys in there. The 7th person has to sleep on the floor. You get showers every 2 days, so a lot of guys shower in the toilets. While we were in the holding area, I saw them take out a body wrapped in a set of bloody sheets with the bloodied bunk mat not far behind. Apparently he was a blood that was thrown into a cell with Crips. Freaking nuts. When I finally get to my cell, the gate slams shut behind me. 5 of the biggest, blackest dudes I've ever seen in my life. A huge graffiti piece on the cell said, "Rollin' 60s Crips." That's Compton for those of you that don't know. One of the gang members comes right to my face and asks, "What's your name, white boy? Is it Bubba?" Ain't you all named Bubba? I knew I was in for a wild ride. Luckily, things went pretty smooth. Minded my own business and didn't get anything sharp in my neck or blunt in my butt. Still one of the most insane places I've been in my life. Absolute mayhem. Did 4 years, 4 months in a prison in Colombia, South America. For most people that are sentenced to more than a year, prison becomes a vacuum cleaner that sucks up your savings, your marriage, and relationships. It is a really hard time for most. I was engaged at the time. She hung in there for about a year and we parted ways. For you, life screeches to a halt, while life rolls along on the outside. One interesting thing that happens is that prison is like a filter that sorts out who your friends really are and who are your real friends. It goes the same with family. Prison is also hard on you psychologically. You have time, a lot of time, to think. For most people, being left alone with their thoughts can be stressing. One thing that would reduce any tough guy into a quivering coward was the word remisión, which is the term used when they transfer convicted inmates to other prisons around the country. No one wanted that. It wasn't a good thing. While I was there were riots, got tear gassed a bunch of times. One time, the big boss gave the order that every cell block barricade themselves, and one cell block took a couple of guards prisoner. This was on the news and it was a big deal. They brought in the GRI, Group of Immediate Reaction, sort of a SWAT for prisons. These guys came seriously armed. When they ran in front of our cell block gate, all the guys ran into the cell block. Me and 2 other less experienced convicts stayed by the door watching, when one of them stood in front of the door and pointed his H&K MP5 at us. I don't know anything about guns, but the other inmates were calling it out. We put our arms in the air. The guy next to me starts screaming, "Don't shoot us, we are not armed." The other guys started praying, so I called out the same thing. "Please don't kill us." The GRI officers start yelling, "Shut up and pull your pants down." We do exactly that and we took our shirts off for good measure. The guy tells us to get on our knees, hands on top of our heads. We're only in that position briefly because shots ring out from another cell block. The guy and some others run toward the gunfire and me and 2 other guys run into the cell block. The first thing the prison does is cut off the power, phones, and electricity. We were on lockdown for 2 days. It was really intense and I really thought we were done for. One night, everyone is in bed sleeping when suddenly someone starts screaming in pain. I thought that someone was getting killed. I was scared out of my mind because you have nowhere to run and nowhere to go. But I started hearing people getting up and talking. It turned out that a roach crawled into the guy's ear. After that, it was toilet paper in your ears when you go to sleep. One day, a young kid got caught stealing some old guy's disposable razor. The old man was begging the houseman not to hit the kid, but it was too late. Examples have to be made. We all had to stand by and watch this poor kid get beat like an animal afterwards. I wasn't the only one with tears in my eyes. Another terrible thing was on visiting days, we would all bunch up at the gate of the cell block waiting for our visits. You would see a new inmate receive his visit and most would break into heart-wrenching sobs. That was hard to watch, mostly because you remember the day it happened to you. Mothers, wives, brothers, sisters, they were all heartbroken and it was your fault. It just sucked. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it wasn't just one thing, it was many. Sorry for the long post. I saw a guy with swastika tattoos on his body befriend a flamboyantly gay black man platonically. Turned my whole world upside down. Actually, for all I know, it could have been a flamboyantly black gay man. Either way, it was sweet. While waiting in jail to go to the PDC, there were 5 guys from my block that liked making people fight. They made up stories and stole things, and then would act like your buddy and say they found your stuff in this guy's bunk. I was warned about this. They finally targeted me and this guy twice my size. Luckily, he was warned too. They stole my deodorant, which is a prize where I was, and put it in his bunk. They told me where it was and I acted mad. Then we all went to his cell. The big guy looked at me and said, "You stole from me. No one steals from me." I winked at him and began lightly slapping him. He laughed and slapped lightly back. We both were yelling. Everyone laughed and I got my deodorant back. The 5 dudes saw we knew what they were up to and moved on to other new inmates. Even though everything worked out, I was secretly crapping and wetting myself to oblivion in my mind. I'm glad there's at least one wholesome post to separate all the awfulness. Did 3 weeks in county for basically being at the wrong place at the wrong time. I had just turned 18 and had never been in trouble, not even in school. I was interrogated in a small room by a huge undercover agent with the stash, who told me that they knew I was the ringleader and that he would make it his personal mission to see that I spent the rest of my life in jail. Did not know any details, so I said nothing. When I was put in a cell, my cellmate was a 6'2" bald Mexican gangster guy, and every night he would loudly pleasure himself while I clinched my thin bed sheets in fear of not sleeping until I knew for sure I no longer heard him. I was released for lack of evidence. Good times. I'm going to give you a family story. My cousin got into some cocaine and heroin problems shortly after his mother died. He did a robbery at knife point on a local shop where my brother now works. Anyway, he goes away for 10 years, serves 8, and was released 3 years ago. He has a wife and 2 kids and is doing really well, so happy ending. The story that comes to mind is during his 5th year, he is one of the longest serving members of the prison, short stay prison in England with only a few people serving sentences over 2 years. Anyway, he gets a guy living next to his cell and starts chatting with him in the cafeteria. They become friends, and after about 3 months, people think nothing of it. But 3 months after he arrives, the inmates break into the back office of the prison and find everyone's records. They found out my cousin's mate has been transferred to this prison because his last prison found out he was a kitty fiddler and he was moved for his safety. My cousin gets told flat out while at dinner one day, "So-and-so, he's been done for kitty fiddling. Do something or you both get it from us." Fearing his safety, my cousin goes over and whacks the guy straight in the jaw with a tray, breaks his jaw and a couple of teeth. My cousin proves he was not sympathizing with the kitty fiddler and didn't get his head kicked in, sent into solitary confinement for 2 weeks. This isn't something that happened to me, but it's something I observed while in. My life was uneventful in my time, which was only about 4 months, and only during nights because I had multiple releases. Anyway, our jail was divided into sides and floors. The higher up you were, the worse of an offender you were. 1L was the floor with the men with releases or protective custody. 1R was women. Up through 5R and L were serious violent offenders. 1L was 12 individual cells, about 5 by 8 feet, surrounded by a larger cage, one TV in the dead middle. Our floor got the new arrivals who mostly, myself included for the first 2 months, had to sleep on rubber mats in the floor. One day, a young black man whom I knew from childhood was moved onto our floor. He'd been in the system since about 12. He had finally been granted work release. The guards hated him. All the guards were white. They didn't pull any punches. This was the year 2000. He was about 19 at this time. The night they moved him in was uneventful. The next morning, his release was for 6 a.m. to be at work at a restaurant at 6:30. The overnight guard was a jerk who loved doing things like dropping our food or releasing us late or holding us for an extra inspection or whatever. That morning, he was too busy to let this inmate out until 9 a.m. Our only phone was collect, and he did, for whatever reason, turn it off that morning so none of us could use it. Kid finally gets out, his ride still waiting, and beats feet to work. They actually let him work till noon, at which point he came immediately back like he was supposed to, during which time they made him sit in the sally port for about 5 hours without food, water, or bathroom. So he gets in after dinner and goes back to his cell, pretty dejected but not being bad or disrespectful. The next morning, they do the same thing. He gets to work and the manager can't do much but fire him, so he comes straight back to work and calls his PO on the way, and she calls the jail to tell them that he won't need his release the next day. So he comes back on the floor and pretty much immediately gets on the phone with his lawyer and family trying to find a new job. Cue the big fat guard dog. She comes walking down the floor outside the second cage laughing, saying something like, "How was work, X?" To which he responds, "You know how it was." And she, I swear to God she says this, says something like, "Shoulda known a lazy N wouldn't go to work on time. Looks like you're going back upstairs with the rest of the monkeys." We're all kind of appalled that she'd say that, and we're all white dudes. So he says something like, "Don't you have anything better to do?" Which is of course what she was hoping for. "Lockdown," she says loudly, which is where we all go back to our cages or mats. We all abide. She gets on her walkie and says her close first left and locks us all in about 3 hours before normal time. He says something like, "You ain't gotta take it out on all these dudes. They didn't do nothing." And she says, "Shut up, inmate, on your knees." Now you have to remember that she's about 6 feet in front of him, and none of us can see because we're all in our cages. Only the cage next to him can see her really, because he's in the last cell. So she starts screaming at him, calling him names, making fun of him, nasty, nasty stuff. So he calls her a dog or something. She pulls out a can of bear spray and just hoses him down and the rest of us by proximity. Then she calls in the response team, which is just one dude and his dog, and they haul the kid out, not fighting, in cuffs and drag him away, leaving the rest of us to wheeze on pepper spray for the rest of the night. That was one story. I could tell you about the guy with the wheelchair or the littering guy or lots of stuff. Thanks everyone for your comments. I didn't expect this to get big. I feel like I've had a pretty wild life and I love talking about the crazy things I've done. 8-time felon Eagle Scout EMT with SAR dogs? Okay. I've worked in youth residential group homes, worked as a counselor, taught public school, had to restrain lots of folks, been stabbed by students, been deposed for very technical ADA-related issues in big lawsuits, and I'm happy to share about all of it because I think our stories could all be shared. For the record, I was originally charged with 28 felonies and something like 15 misdemeanors for breaking and entering. Effectively, the DA took every single unsolved B&E from the previous year and charged me with it. We couldn't afford the $10,000 my lawyer wanted to go to trial. That was after the $10,000 he charged just to represent me. So we took a plea bargain of 8 felonies and 3 groups, all B&E. I was supposed to receive 1 to 10 years in the state pen for each one, but the judge realized that things weren't what they seemed, and instead grouped the charges and sentenced me to 3 to 30, suspended it, and gave me 6 months in counting with releases for work, school, and community service. So I pretty much just spent the night in jail for 4 to 5 months. Really lucky and really not too bad. I won't say that I was innocent, but I also won't say that I was remotely guilty of what I was charged with or what I pled guilty to. My PO, that's another whole series of stories, decided that I was the poster child for reform and had me speak to her interns about recidivism and corrections, and then for an unknown reason decided I was bad and tried 3 times to revoke my probation, all unsuccessfully. I graduated with a 3.7 overall GPA in 2003. 8 months inside, and one instance always sticks out of my mind. I was running out of phone minutes and spending what precious time I had left talking to my child. We didn't get to talk as much as I liked, had unfortunately more important people to talk to. Lawyers, trying to find jobs for my release, etc. This jerk comes up. I need the phone. Hold on, man, I only got a couple minutes left. He takes the phone and slammed it into the crappy payphone holster and abruptly hung up on my daughter. Still breaks my heart because I cherish every minute I can have with her. I worked as a guard in a military prison for 4 years, and after reading the stories in here, I'm glad I didn't transition to federal corrections when I got out. The things I read about in here. I didn't see either, but my buddy witnessed 2 events. One where a guy in the labor yard took his shovel and full-on swung it into the side of a guy's face, shattered his jaw and dropped like a sack. He lived. After his surgeries were done, he was transferred to a different facility. Another guy was an MP who was the arresting officer of an inmate. When the MP was sent to the jail, I don't remember what he did, probably some possession charge. We had a few prior MPs in the jail. He didn't remember the guy at all, but the inmate broke his jaw with an elbow coming out of the shower one day. His wasn't so bad off as the first guy, he stayed for the rest of his sentence, but was kept in a different block than the other inmate. The head cook was pimping out her female cooks to the inmates. Their families would wire money to the head cook, who would then get that inmate assigned to kitchen duties so she could screw the female cooks. As a result of this, we had to man an extra guard to stay in the kitchen at all times. The head cook was sent to Leavenworth, and the 2 she was pimping out were dishonorably discharged from the army. Outside of that, the worst altercation I've seen was 2 inmates fighting in a block and knocking the TV over. 40 inmates in the block collectively went, "Oh crap, no." And once the fight was over, they were all asking us to check on the TV and hoping it still worked. Didn't give a crap about the 2 bloody idiots we took to segregation. That TV though, fortunately it did still work. Put it back on its stand and plugged it back in and came right back up. The place I was at was mostly pretty laid back. We had a saying, it's 365 days of boredom with 5 days of excitement. It's worse than the hot days of summer and around Christmas. Tempers flare and everyone is depressed. Oh, there was also a time where a female guard was doing a block check and walked into the shower, which wasn't on, and found an inmate laying along the wall, head and neck on the floor, back and legs up the wall, pleasuring himself because he was trying to eat his own emission. She wrote him up for that. It was freaking hilarious to read that report. One guy had a heart attack in the rec yard. One of the inmates we had was a ranger medic. He was there because his chute line got stuck jumping from a plane and he shattered his jaw. Seems like there's a trend. And when he recovered, he had permanent jaw pain. Since he was a medic, he kept writing his own narcotic prescriptions so he wouldn't have to see the doctor, which is a big no-no. So he was sent to jail for drug abuse. Anyway, when the inmate had a heart attack in the rec yard, we sent a newbie private to run up to Delta Block for this inmate because he was the only one the guards knew had any experience with this kind of stuff. When the paramedics arrived, he gave a full account to them of everything that was going on and very well could have saved that guy's life. I spent a short amount of time in a county jail. The first morning, they came and handed out those small cardboard cereal boxes that come in variety packs. I remember wolfing down the cereal as I hadn't eaten in a day or 2 and was starving. They then came back around and served the milk. I was angry. What's the most legendary thing that happened at your school? My school was on a hill and the tallest building in the area. During Fleet Week, the Blue Angels flew what must have been 100 to 200 feet above it, shattered like 30 windows on the top floor of the school. I attended a high school called Rampart that, despite being a blue ribbon school, had serious budget issues. The budget problems got so bad that the principal started renting out the school gym to anyone willing to pay up to use it. Some guy rented the gym out for a Saturday night, saying he was going to hold a church dance. Instead, he held a rave that got so out of hand it destroyed the gym. The incident quickly grew into legend amongst the students. Many claimed to have been there or to have known the guy who threw the rave. We weren't able to use the gym for the rest of the year. They kept the doors locked, but there were constant attempts to force them open so we could see the damage. It didn't take long for the students to start referring to the school as Rave Part, and whenever we had to sing the national anthem, we would finish it in the home of the rave. The next year, we had a new principal too, but we never knew if the old principal was fired because of the rave incident. 2 teachers screwing in an empty class. They thought they had locked the door. A student caught them. They were both fired. We have a school news channel that sometimes did live segments about new stuff going on. This was every morning in homeroom. One morning, they were doing a walkthrough of the new part of the school just built. They walk into a staircase and some girl is sitting on some kid's face on the floor. This is at 8 a.m. and the entire school saw it. Some dude in English class sat next to the electrical outlet, so we decided to grab the kid next to him and stick a piece of metal into the outlet. Shocked the heck out of both of them. They were both fairly okay, but almost scared the teacher to death. Also, there was the time a girl screwed two dudes in the auditorium during a basketball game, and it was caught in the school camera. Her family ended up sending her somewhere else after that. This happened at my school in the UK around 2002. We had an indoor swimming pool at my school that was always really cold, and one particularly freezing December day, a bunch of us decided that we really didn't fancy having to do swimming for PE, so we dared this kid called Todd, who was pretty crazy, to crap in the pool. He said he would do it for 10 pounds. We had a quick whip round and managed to get the money pretty quick between us. To avoid getting caught, he decided to crap into the pool from the roof through a skylight. A lot of the buildings in our school had staircases on the outside, so it didn't take much effort for a couple of us to give him a leg up onto the roof. Once he was up there, we ran back down to the pool and looked through the windows. Sure enough, after a couple of minutes, we saw 2 or 3 of Todd's crap apples drop into the perfectly still pool, causing a gentle, disgusting, but oddly beautiful ripple. There was no PE for us that day. There was a huge sexting scandal where a handful of girls' images were being sent around. Well, when the school caught wind of it, they did the only thing a school could do. They held an assembly. Girls in the auditorium and boys in the gym. After an hour or so of, "you shouldn't do that," they had the district attorney come in to talk about the legality of underage sexting. One of the seniors stood up and asked him if it was legal if they were over 18. He said yes, and the entire place went nuts. Everyone was cheering, clapping, and laughing. The principal walked over to the mic and said, "Who asked that?" The guy stood up again and triumphantly said, "Zen Master Steve!" The audience once again erupted into cheers as he got called into the principal's office. I watched a friend sneeze and hit their head off a desk so hard that they gave themselves a concussion. There's a tradition here in Australia that the year 12s, final year of high school, usually have a day called Muck Up Day, where they play pranks or whatever in the school. Well, one year, the year 12s decided to screw with the whole school and placed roadwork signs and cones on one of the main roads next to the school. They diverted all that traffic through the school, essentially screwing up a lot of people's days. It is the best thing anyone has done on Muck Up Day at our school. At the school where I used to teach, the students told me that years ago, someone swapped the science teacher's Bill Nye video with the hardcore adult tape. According to legend, the teacher didn't notice for quite a while, and the students watched several minutes of smut that day. I told my class that it was a stupid rumor, and I'm sure that never happened. When class was over, one of my students walked up and said, "Mister, it's true. My brother was the one who switched that tape." Went to a boarding school, so several screw tapes and photos got leaked. This was 2004 to 2006, so before iPhones and whatnot. This mainly happened due to a program called MyTunes, where you could share your iTunes and movie libraries on the network. So people would accidentally drop their videos and photos into the folder that was shared without realizing it, and people bored looking for new music or whatever would stumble upon it. Once the administration found out about a video and the student was 18, allegedly, he had to watch the video with the president of the school in his office in order to determine that it didn't happen on campus and that both participants were of age. Didn't get in trouble at all. I mean, glad that he didn't get in trouble, but could you imagine the awkwardness of having to sit in an office with a supervisor watching your own screw tape? I took an A+ course in high school. We had an alright sized lab room for stripping computers and another room full of computers for other worker lessons. There were a few stuffed animals in the lesson room as a half-hearted attempt by my teacher to decorate. Those come into play later. My teacher kept finding certain history on one of the computers. It was always horribly spelled or incoherent searches, and she assumed it was a freshman being smart to impress his friends during a different class. One day she gets fed up with it and makes a special project for us nerds in her A+ course. She gave us one of the lab computers and the smallest cam she could find and asked us to make a hidden camera. We complied and made a decent one and brought it into the other room, set it to record with more than enough hard drive space and aimed it at the perp's pewter. The next day we fire up the vid and see one of the seniors coming in before school starts, Googling some videos and giving himself the old wax job. He cleaned up with one of the stuffed animals and went about his business. She threw out the stuffed animals and the cops got involved. Kid got into trouble but went into the army after high school, so maybe it all worked out in the end. Sorry, the stuffed animal? It didn't do anything. Why that? Why Teddy? My junior year, the seniors put hay everywhere inside the freaking English building, where it basically looked like a farm. One of the admins wasn't even letting people look at the mess inside. Also, when I was in 2nd grade, my school was supposed to have a fire drill, so for some reason the alarm wasn't going off. The lunch ladies decided it would be a good idea to set something in the kitchen on fire to make the alarm go off. They burned a good majority of the lunch that was supposed to be served that day. My high school was a bit on the sketchy side. During my sophomore year, there was a fire, and despite all the fire drills we've been doing since kindergarten, no one really knew what to do. Some students made their way 10 blocks away to a Wendy's and a Waldbaum's, where they proceeded to rob both. At the end of my junior year, this sophomore threw his freshman girlfriend through a display case. She ended up with 13 stitches, and he got a lovely pair of handcuffs. In my senior year, we got a new principal because the old one quit at the end of the year prior. Anyway, this was the year the 5th Harry Potter book came out, and even before the school year started, people were calling her Umbridge because of her reputation at her last school. Most of us thought she couldn't be that bad. Then we met her. She really was awful. To make matters worse, she was racist to boot. One of the black teachers didn't agree with her teaching style, so she fired his lazy butt, in her words. Within a week, the NAACP was at the school. Before she finally resigned, there was a student walkout and people started throwing cafeteria fruit at her whenever they saw her. We were all glad to be rid of her. When I was in grade 9, I was sitting in the computer lab working during the communications class. All of a sudden, we hear this loud revving getting louder and louder, something passing by very quickly then fading away. Our teacher ran out of the room after it, and crike, I had no idea the man could move that quickly. I was in crutches due to a sports injury, so I had to hobble out behind the rest of the class as we tried to find out what was going on. Apparently, one of the seniors brought an ATV to school and drove through the halls. What was legendary was that he somehow was never caught. This was in Canada in the early 2000s. There's a video floating somewhere on Facebook, which probably means it's lost forever. Pretty crappy since it was literally one of the early digital cameras taped onto the guy's helmet. If I remember correctly, they let him in through an unused auto classroom side door, and he rode out the back. The area was very rural, so he probably drove it in instead of in the back of a pickup. Most likely rode it straight home too, so yeah, no proof at the end of it. A guy from my high school thought it would be a great idea to streak through the halls on the last day of school. After running around buck naked, people who witnessed it began whispering about some guy streaking. Pretty soon, the entire school was talking about this unknown mystery guy who ran around with his willy out. Biology teacher witnessed it and said, maybe he's just chilly today, but he isn't very well endowed. Soon after, he went to the front office and turned himself in. He apparently walked into a room full of administrators, all women, and just said, "It was me." They all busted out laughing and said, "Just don't do it again, okay?" Low blow from the bio teacher. Viewers, it is time for me to regale you with the story of Jeff. Jeff jumped off the roof of the chapel into a dumpster filled with empty cardboard boxes. 50-foot drop, 8x8 dumpster. Twice a week at our school, the junior and senior guys were on garbage recycling duty after lunch. We'd gather all the garbage bags and recycling from the classrooms and offices. The building was a school attached to a church with offices and a sort of community center. It wasn't a huge building, but it was pretty big. We'd take out all the garbage and trash out to the dumpster, which was set next to some sheds behind the building. That's how it all started. Jeff jumping off a 10 to 12-foot shed into a dumpster full of cardboard boxes. We'd laugh, roll the dumpster out to where the garbage guy could get to it. Someone else rolled it back when the garbage was collected. One day, Jeff climbed the backstop of the baseball field right near the dumpsters. That was a 25 to 30-foot drop, I think. He made that one look easy. Then he dropped in from out of a tree. That was probably about 40 feet. Finally, about a month from our graduation, he told us his plan. He had to break into the crawl space above the chapel, accessible by a padlocked trapdoor on the 3rd floor of classrooms, then climb up through the attic space of the chapel and onto the roof. The chapel parking lot sloped sharply by about 7 to 8 feet, which is where the 50-foot drop comes in. We saved boxes for weeks, set them up at the dumpster, put it in the parking lot about 15 feet from the chapel wall, and watched him jump. Our school has a huge statue of a Mustang at the front because our mascot is a Mustang, naturally. It's about 40 feet up above the entryway, so everyone sees it. One morning, there was a bright pink adult toy on it because Mustangs are male and our huge statue was neutered. It took them a while to get it off of there because they didn't want to ruin the statue or leave any piece of the evidence behind, and it was too heavy to remove from its place, so there it stayed with a banner hung across the entryway blocking the statue. Nobody knows who did it except for the masterminds of the crime. For information, the school was in southwest Pennsylvania.
Ha! Took him a while to get it off!
My first day of high school. I was starting at a whole new neighborhood from moving and knew no one, so I kept to myself. I didn't handle crowds all too well, but I mustered the courage to get out of bed and get ready for school. I ran downstairs and talked to my dad about what I expected to get out of the day and ate breakfast. I walked out to the corner to catch the school bus, and that was awful. Nowhere to sit as everyone felt they each had their own dang seat. Story short, I made it to school. As soon as we made it to the school, I started walking to my locker. There were so many people, I was about to lose my mind, and I asked myself if it could get any worse. It did. A girl bumped me from behind to get ahead to catch up with someone. In one swift action, she ripped off her backpack and unzipped it to pull out a kitchen knife to stab the girl directly in front of me right in the back. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I felt dizzy. I turned around and walked straight home. I lived about 10 miles away. I just kept walking. I never looked back. I just wanted to make it home, crawl upstairs, and sleep in. One hot day in June, when I was in 6th or 7th grade, there was basically a riot at our school. Pretty much every kid in the school at lunch recess gathered at the office entrance to the school and started chanting, "It's too hot! We want to go home!" It was pretty incredible. A teacher at one point came out and said, "We're calling the police," to no avail. Finally, the bell rang, and everyone cheered and went inside. No one I've talked to remembers this event. A student accidentally butt-dialed his mother while the class was watching Platoon. The SWAT team showed up. Apparently some of the guys a few years ahead of me got into the principal's car, took off the brakes, and pushed it up a makeshift ramp to the roof of the shed. I don't know how he got it down. The guys in my year managed to swipe the vice principal's smoking pipe. They put up ransom posters everywhere. In another class, they managed to get into the ceiling tiles and plug socket, so they took an old phone with a dirty ringtone and a charger and left it up there. For whatever reason, because of acoustics, the sounds seemed to shift around the room as you walked. The number got passed around so people could call whenever they needed to disrupt the class for a while. 853 missed calls, 2 missed SMS messages. Seems like every couple months you practice fire drills, and one day the alarm goes off. We start making our way down the stairwell and there's smoke. I get outside and say to somebody, "Wow, they make these fire drills so realistic, smoke and everything." The reply I got back was, "The school really is on fire." So, yeah, my school caught on fire. That was legendary. I'm not the brightest tool in the shed. Somebody! Kid gets yelled at, runs out of the school into the woods. Helicopters come and search for hours for the kid. School goes on lockdown. SWAT team finds him a mile away eating Snickers in the woods. Comes back next week like nothing happened. I saw the whole thing out the window. Very crazy. Happened last month. For 5 consecutive Halloweens in a row, someone managed to set off a smoke bomb in one of the stairwells, causing the school to have to be let out early. They do it just after lunch, after most everyone had just entered their first afternoon class. It was amazing. Like, heck yeah, getting to go home 2 hours early on Halloween. A massive Roman candle fight involving about 50 kids in the middle of the field on Halloween night. Every Easter, our religious education teacher bolted a big wooden cross onto the wall and people could volunteer to go on the cross. You stood on a little platform and there were leather straps to hold your hands in place. He said that if anyone stayed on for longer than 5 minutes, he paid them £5, but nobody ever managed it. This was 6 years ago. 2 years ago, the app Yik Yak was growing in popularity at my school. Maybe about 25% of the student population had it, but since it's anonymous, people just started roasting other people through it. Just as people were no longer using Yik Yak, our craphead principal heard about people roasting other people. He made an announcement talking about Yik Yak and digital citizenship. Naturally, everyone re-downloaded the app, and anybody who didn't previously have it downloaded it as well. Word quickly got out that some teachers got Yik Yak as well and were monitoring it. People started to post stuff like "fight in the art hallway" and laugh as a group of 3 teachers would speed walk by then towards the art hallway, only to find out there was no fight and see the next post "fight in the cafeteria." This went on for 45 minutes until people moved on to better pranks. "I'm pulling the fire alarm next period." Our craphead principal misread this as firearm and called a lockdown on the school which lasted for 80 minutes, and there were cop cases all around the school. Later that night, my school was on the news, and Yik Yak is now blocked within 100 meters of any school in my school board. TLDR, my school got Yik Yak banned in my entire school board. Maybe it wasn't just my school board, maybe it's all of Canada or something. I'm really not too sure. I went to a professional training high school. We had to choose a major for our senior year, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we would spend the entire day in classes involving our chosen major. Strange, yeah, only lasted for a few years. Now it's just a regular magnet school. Whatever. Here's my story. My tech teacher was cool as heck. He'd give us a project on Tuesday morning, and we'd have until Thursday afternoon to turn it in. If we were done early, have fun on the internet. If late, well, that's a strike on your grade. Most of the students busted their butt on projects on Tuesdays, so we could watch Jerry Springer on the TV cart in the back of the room on Thursdays. Me and 2 other kids would play Warcraft 2 on the network computers we set up. Seriously, this teacher didn't give a crap as long as our work was done. One Thursday, one of the students in my class was flipping around the in-service channels the school had. Sometimes they would play a movie on it for some class. Guess what? Adult films. Hardcore black-on-black adult films. Student quickly turned it down and turned the TV from the line of view of the teacher. Teacher still heard it. He came over, coffee cup in hand, looked at the class, looked at the TV that wasn't turned off in time, looked back at the class, took a sip. First off, if anyone offended, no, keep it low. If someone comes in, turn it off. I hope that teacher is living their best life. A guy drove through the school on a dirt bike. He was doing wheelies and dodging the supervisors who couldn't catch up to the dirt bike on their golf carts. Then, later that day, he posted the video he recorded of the whole thing from a GoPro on Twitter. He was a legend. I was in an all-boys high school, and this is just one of the many pranks and stuff we did. This happened a few years before I was in the school, but one guy decided to get back at one of the old crappy teachers we had whose class was on the second floor. He decided to purposefully not do his homework to get in trouble as to set the plan in motion. She was also constantly picking on him, and that day he started crying, fake obviously, and saying he can't take it anymore, etc. He then proceeded to jump out of the window onto a high jump mattress that was placed underneath the window by his friends. Before the teacher could look out of the window, they removed it, and he went to lie down on the ground in a manner which resembled a mangled body. The teacher freaked out, went to fetch the principal and nurse, etc., and before they got up there, he got up and went back to class and sat down at his seat as if nothing happened. Teacher was speechless. Like I said, this happened a few years before I was in the school, so I didn't really hear about the aftermath of their shenanigans. It's also possible that it never happened, and that it's an urban legend going around. In high school, we weren't allowed to wear costumes for Halloween. My senior year, a giant group of us, about a good half or 3/4 of the class, decided that we were going to dress up anyway and meet in the parking lot before school to march in together. I spent the night before making my costume, which was a suit of armor made out of cardboard with metallic tape, a sword made the same way, and one of those broomstick horses. The next day, we all gathered like we had said and marched in together. It was hilarious, but I guess they found out, so the deans and assistant deans were waiting for us in the cafeteria to take our IDs so we could report to detention. One of my friends had dressed up as an ATM that he made out of cardboard. When they asked him for his ID, he was ready and slipped it out of a slot like a debit card. The best part was at the end of the day when we all gathered for detention. They didn't have enough room for us and all the other people that were there for other reasons. Out of frustration, they decided to make our detentions Saturday ones and spread them out. It was totally worth it though. Strap in, this one's a long one. At our school in the UK, on the year 11's final day of the year, they would do Egg and Flour Day, essentially pelting the lower years with eggs and flour. This was a long-standing tradition at my school and went back decades. As you can imagine, with parents understandably annoyed at the sight of the kids coming home covered in mess, the school received a lot of complaints. Because of this, the school clamped down on it in the past 2 to 3 years with huge punishments for those caught taking part. To get around this, the year 11s typically moved the location to somewhere off grounds where students could be ambushed on the way home, typically the local shops. Anyway, it was our turn. We were the year 11s now. We wanted to make our mark. A group of around 10 or so of us got together towards the end of the year and started brainstorming. It took us about a week to come up with it, and it was perfect. Or so we thought. Here was the plan. The school was recently going through some renovations, so a few things were moved around and a few areas were off limits, including one of the fields. Now, this field was where we would go in the event of a fire drill. Because of this, the fire drill point was moved to the tennis courts. Great. Why was this great? Because the tennis courts bordered on the local woods. The very edge of these woods were bordered by incredibly dense growth that was very difficult to see anything through. Between the growth and the tennis courts was a 10-foot fence, and just behind the growth was a pathway. Perfect. So the plan was set. We'll send a guy inside, get him to pull the fire alarm, then send a barrage of eggy flour death to the unsuspecting lower year peasants beyond the fence. Skip forward to the day of the event. We sent Tim in to be the man on the inside. We were ready and waiting in the woods, armed to the teeth with pancake ingredients. We waited a long time. It must have been an hour and a half at that point. We'll come back to this later. This was before mobile phones, so we had no contact with the man on the inside. An oversight. We sent in Christian to find out what was going on. And we waited. Not long this time, 20 minutes later, the bell went off. It was happening. First, we could only hear the piercing ring of the bell. A minute later, the loud chatter of many prepubescent voices. It got louder and louder. The tennis court was filling up. Students were getting into their lines. We waited for the perfect moment to strike. A few more minutes later, things quietened down. We started to hear the teachers shooting out names, going through their registers. This was it. Time to strike. With the students now silent, it was time to unsilence them. Without saying a word, we unleashed. Cartons of eggs were emptied into the air, over the fence, and down onto the underlings into the most satisfying crack splats. Flour baggies were spilt and tossed over, leaving trails of white smoke before landing with a puff and filling up the area with clouds of potential biscuit. The screams, oh, they were glorious. The complete sound of chaos. It started with silence, shock as to what was going on. Then the fear set in. Nobody wanted to be egged. The tennis courts exploded into a mass of running kids, dodging yolk, trying to get out of the way. Teachers trying to find out what was going on, barking orders and trying to calm everyone down to little success. And that was it. Within 60 seconds, we had exhausted our ammo and it was time to retreat. Laughing hysterically and celebrating our accomplishment, we melted back into the woods and fell back to our meeting point. It was done. We were legends. Now let's fast forward a week. Remember Tim, the guy on the inside who took too long pulling the alarm? Turns out he didn't pull the alarm, because we noticed they were all covered by CCTV. Another oversight. When Christian went in, he didn't bother looking and pulled the first alarm he came across. He was called into the school a few days later and ordered to give a list of names. It was either he did or prom would be canceled that year. Can't blame him really, I probably would have done the same thing. Those who were on the list, the choice was either 8 hours community service in the school or be barred from prom. We all took the service and spent the day with the school caretaker doing absolutely nothing. It was great. 10 out of 10 would egg again. What happened at a wedding that let you know the marriage was going to end in a divorce? The groom looked drunk and the bride seemed incredibly angry. Then there was this woman walking around during the reception placing bets on when they would divorce. I later found out she was the mother of the groom. The groom said in his speech, "When I joined a dating agency, I never thought I'd be so lucky as to find my own personal cook, dishwasher, and washing machine. Not only is that a crappy way to describe anyone, he's in for a nasty surprise when he realizes his wife is actually a complete diva and will expect him to do all those things for her. Bad relationship all around." Groom's mistress found out he was getting married and showed up at the wedding, in the middle of the I do's, walked right up on stage and smacked him in the face, pulling a Will Smith slap before the Will Smith slap even happened. The groom stabbed his new brother-in-law to death with the knife used to cut the wedding cake, no less. Well, technically it happened at the reception, not the wedding. Yeah, like that's a detail I was worried about, and not the fact that somebody was stabbed to death at a wedding. Backstory. About 4 years before the wedding, the wife's brother had shot her in the leg during an argument. Yes, alcohol was involved. At the reception, he started loudly telling the guests that he wished he'd shot her in the head instead, at which point the groom got stabby. Alcohol was, again, involved. At the rehearsal dinner, the groom's mom is in tears because he looks miserable. And he was. We all knew it. During the vows they had written for each other, the bride starts with, "I know I could be a pretty terrible person, and I don't know why you've stuck around, but that's all going to change starting today." They were divorced a year later. She flinched when he turned to kiss her. They were divorced within 6 months. The bride had the minister put "till death or divorce do us part" into the ceremony. My cousin, the bride, told us as she was going from table to table thanking the guests that she didn't think it would last. We were stunned. They lasted about a year. I thought my sister's wedding was. Her husband got blackout drunk and they got into an argument. He passed out and she ended up throwing a bucket of ice water in his face to snap him out of it. She was devastated about it. Happy ending? He made it up to her big time. Also, he felt very out of it, even the next day. Turns out he had traces of Rohypnol in his system. His own brother roofied him in hopes he wouldn't marry my sister because he wanted their own friendship to remain the same. My brother-in-law has disowned most of his family because of this, and his brother just got out of a 4-year prison sentence. The bride, whom I didn't even know, apparently designated me to help decorate the reception hall prior to the wedding. I went to do so, and her mother was there telling me in a hushed, scared whisper that I better not mess anything up because the bride would be furious. Everything was to be a certain way, and if it was wrong, there'd be hell to pay. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, chalked it up to wedding anxiety, and during the reception, I tried to chat with her a bit, and she literally rolled her eyes at me. I also didn't see her look at the groom once at the wedding or the reception. They were split less than a year later. Later, the groom confided to me and my husband that the morning of the wedding, he'd been filled with an overwhelming feeling of dread and spent several hours just sitting on his lawn thinking, I shouldn't do this. But it was paid for, tons of guests were waiting, lots of family, including us, had come in from out of state, and he felt he had to go through with it. Apparently, the bride had a history of being awful and controlling. No clue what made him propose to her in the first place. Edit. Just Facebook stalked the ex-bride. Her latest status update is announcing her wedding date with a new guy. Someone jokingly asked in the comments if they set a date for the divorce. Oh snap! Holy crap. My cousin Jan's wedding was basically just a preamble to an elaborate dance of divorce that we all knew was coming from the moment the engagement began. For context, this took place 15 years ago in the backwoods of North Carolina. My family is just a generation or two removed from snake handling in church, so some of the wackiness is the product of upwardly mobile inbreeding and redneck gumption. Just a few things that come to mind. Her fiancé proposed to her over the corpse of her father. He was over with the family watching TV when Jan's dad collapsed on the floor. He died before emergency services arrived. Her boyfriend grabbed her hands as she was sitting next to her father's body, pulled her up to her feet, and then asked her to marry him. He later said that he didn't want her to get away. The fiancé then disappeared for a month the week after the funeral. Nobody knew where to find him. The bride's white trash mother told Jan that she had to get married within 4 months because she, the mother, my aunt, planned to move to another state with her new boyfriend to avoid bill collectors. When Jan's fiancé showed back up, he was cagey and weird. Eventually, it came out that he'd been living with his ex-girlfriend because she insisted that he had to give to her a month of his life or she'd take him to court for child support that he was supposed to be paying on their infant son, but had never paid. Throughout all of this, Jan continued to insist that she wanted to marry him. My mother and I did most of the wedding prep and arrangements. Jan's mom, despite insisting on the 4-month timeline to help pay for the wedding before her move, never contributed a dime. And we were both pretty convinced that the wedding was going to be canceled at any moment. But the day arrived, and so did the principal players. At the wedding itself, the groom walked around drinking PBR out of a massive travel thermos with a novelty straw and told everyone who would listen that Jan was a good starter wife. Jan threw several tantrums about stupid stuff, including one in which she accused the groom of stealing her drink. He told her she was a dumb woman, but it all worked out because she then found her drink. The groom pulled the ring off of Jan's finger during the reception and swallowed it as a joke. The groom picked a fight with his father because his dad had asked the ex-girlfriend to stay at home, and the groom had really wanted her to be there. Jan was in the dark about this invitation until the fight broke out. Epilogue, shocking precisely nobody, except possibly Jan herself, they eventually did divorce. Eating the ring caused the groom some discomfort, so they had to cancel their honeymoon to the mountains so that he could go to the ER and get hospital-grade laxatives. They lost money on the cancellation and the ER visit, which they really didn't have to lose. That resulted in some immediate debt problems, and they lost the trailer they planned to rent when they couldn't come up with a deposit. That resulted in both of them moving into the groom's parents' home into his old bedroom. Things went downhill from there. The groom's ex-girlfriend popped back up less than 3 months after the wedding, heavily pregnant with a second child. She went after him for another shared month, but Jan wasn't cool with it. The ex ended up taking him to court for child support. Jan got a second job to make ends meet while resigning herself to living with her in-laws for a while longer. One day, after he dropped her off at work, the groom sold Jan's car. He then disappeared for several more weeks. She lost both jobs and shortly thereafter realized she was pregnant. The groom accused her of cheating because he thought he couldn't have more than 2 children in a lifetime, and his ex-girlfriend had already filled the quota. As I understand it, this is what ultimately caused the rift in their relationship. Back to normal stories. Groom got caught getting frisky with the bridesmaid. That marriage lasted for about 2 hours. When the father of the bride tells the groom, "How can you marry somebody like her? You are too nice. You deserve better." Surely enough, the marriage lasted less than 3 years. During the whole time, the wife was doing drugs and prostituted herself to get money for drugs. We knew the couple was in trouble when they frowned during most of the ceremony and later didn't go on a honeymoon because they couldn't agree on a destination. They had plenty of money, just no desire to compromise. At the end of the reception, the guys are sitting at a table away from everyone else talking, and we asked the groom why he proposed. His answer? Because she was naked. Marriage lasted about 1.5 years. At my brother's wedding, his bride gave him the cheek at the "you may kiss the bride" part. Yeah, she ended up cheating on him with some guy online in less than a year. My sister's new husband made out with the bridesmaid on the dance floor of the reception. During the ceremony, when the priest started asking the bride, "Do you take this man to be your..." she started laughing uncontrollably and couldn't stop. It was cute for about 10 seconds and then things got real uncomfortable. They lasted 1 year and change. We all kinda knew the only reason they were getting married was because she got pregnant. Groom got so drunk at the reception he passed out in the honeymoon suite by himself, but not before he latched the door so it couldn't be unlocked from the outside. Seeing the bride kicking the door and hollering at the top of her lungs to be let in at 3 a.m. was not encouraging. They divorced like 2 years later. I was working at a wedding factory. On Monday, we got a call the Saturday wedding was canceled. They were told that they would lose the deposit, around $7,000. Then on Thursday, they said it was back on. When the guests arrived, everyone was mad. It seems they told everyone that it was off, then 2 days later that it was on. The ceremony was about 3 minutes. The bride then changed into sweatpants and then everyone got angry drunk. Well, this won't last long, I thought. Then on the following Monday, the bride walked into my then-wife's divorce attorney's office. Our friend was the girl who had spent a whole year setting up for the one day. They had taken 6 months of dancing lessons, and she has spent a ridiculous amount of time looking good and dressing up her bridesmaids for the wedding of which my wife was one. So, come the night of the wedding, the groom meets up with his old friends and starts to get blackout drunk. He got so drunk he didn't even recognize us, rather just pushing us aside to get to the bathroom. The worst part was the dance itself. It was really heartbreaking to see them stumble around and watch the panic on her face as he realized he had no idea what was going on. I gave it 6 months at the time, but they ended up 3 years. She ended up marrying another woman. Groom mashed the cake into the pregnant bride's face so hard she went down backwards. Groom and his father ended up fistfighting in the bathroom, cops were called, fun times. It was a shotgun wedding. They proudly proclaimed it as such. Overheard the bride's mother saying that the bride was such a later bloomer for waiting until 19 to trap herself a man. The child is 3 years old and they have been separated, don't know if divorced, since she was 1. Walking in on the groom getting railed by one of the groomsmen in the suite at the resort during the reception. My cousin's wedding. The groom invited his ex, who was also the mother of his 1-year-old son. He and my cousin had been dating for longer than 2 years. And my cousin, who was then very pregnant herself, got into a loud screaming match with him over it in a bathroom. They eventually came out and got married, my cousin with puffy red eyes from crying that you can see in every wedding photo that was taken. They spent $50,000 on a Disney wedding and the bride spent 0 time anywhere near the in-laws for several hours. She ran off a week later. While saying the classic "I do," instead of looking deep into his bride's eyes, the groom was peeking at one of the bridesmaids. I do audio-visual for social events, a lot of weddings. At one engagement party, my coworker tells the story of the soon-to-be groom trying to carry off his soon-to-be bride, because he's manly and will have his way with her. Anyways, she is screaming at him to put her down, and when he finally complies, she slaps him right across the face and yells, "I'm not done dancing!" When I was 17, I was a bridesmaid in my 19-year-old cousin's shotgun wedding. After the ceremony, we got into the limo to go to the reception. She turns to me and says, "God, I wish I was single." The groom didn't look at the bride once. Sister's wedding. Husband ends speech saying, "Thanks for settling for me." 18 months later, agreed to divorce. 4 people made speeches. The bride joked about the first time she dated the groom when she was 16 and he was 26. The groom was wasted and spoke about how each of the previous times they broke up didn't count and that they would do it right this time. The maid of honor talked about how even when they were broken up they still got along, and the best man made crappy jokes. Groom's brother didn't attend because he too had banged the bride before. The groom invited his female friend. She was in the early stages of pregnancy. Towards the end of the night, the bride asked aforementioned friend who the father was. The friend cheerfully said the groom's name. The bride got blackout drunk and asked me to kill her husband. He was busy fighting one of his groomsmen in the other room. They divorced 2 years later. The day of her wedding, I asked my sister-in-law if she was enjoying her day, and all she said was, "It's a freaking nightmare. This is the worst day of my life." Dude said the wrong name at the altar. When I read this one, I went, uh-oh. I was reunited with the family member just before her wedding. We went out drinking, and she proudly pointed out a guy at the bar that she'd just gone on a trip with and had a week-long prenup rail romp. She seemed to think I'd think that was naughty and funny. I just felt bad for her future husband, but figured it was just a bad choice. The day of the wedding, I went to see her in the bridal suite. She had the guy there with him. She screwed him the night before the wedding. They lasted a few years, but it was a miserable few. My cousin married a nice, respectable girl from Connecticut, but he is a not-so-nice, not-so-respectable Massachusetts stereotype from Norfolk County. Cuz got drunk with his band of Mickeys and Sullys the night before, and when I saw him for pictures that morning, he was sucking on a pint of Skull vodka before throwing it in the corner of the church and calling his friend a slur. He had the same grin on his face for every picture. I pumped some coffee into him. We thought we had it under control, but during the ceremony, he flipped off the guest twice. His brother also taped "Help Me" on the bottom of his shoes for when they took the mass. The bride's father was furious. But then came the reception. My mom didn't want to go. I wish we hadn't. Cuz continued sucking down booze, as did his pals. The bride, God save her, wanted to go ahead with the first dance, Stand By Me. Cuz didn't put down his drink, was grabbing her butt during the dance, and finally spilled it all down her dress. She slapped him, he pushed her. Father of the groom charges the dance floor. The bench is clear. My brother and I ask Mom if she wants us to get involved. She grabs her purse and says, "Let's leave." As his buddies were holding Cuz back, she walked over, slapped him, and said, "Thank God your grandmother died, you disgraceful little Mick." Mama is a very quiet woman. We grabbed Mama and hightailed it out. 2 cops passed us on the way in. They began the annulment 1 week later. I haven't talked to him since, although he emailed me asking if he could borrow $5,000. He lives in a camper from what I hear. Friend got married. On his honeymoon, his wife went to the spa. He stayed in the room to chill. Housekeeping came, young cute girl. Friend paid her for head, told me about all proud. Didn't last a year. Toward the end of the reception, the bride suggested to the groom he run home and change into street clothes so they could clean the venue and get the deposit returned. Groom got back and bride had opened all the gift envelopes and paid back relatives with the cash they contained. Source: the groom was me. I was in charge of choosing a male strip club for the bachelorette party. I went to check a place out, bumped into the groom in the audience. We've got a timeline for this one. A bunch of my family members are betting on how long one of my cousin's marriage would last. It's definitely going to end in divorce, but we just don't know when. Here's all the crap that happened. Pre-wedding, the couple can't even agree on invitation card designs, so they decided each would have their own. Some people received 2 invitations. Wedding. They're both from different races, and the groom's family insisted on having a wedding ceremony from their culture too. The bride refused the part where she has to kneel before her husband and wash his feet clean. The groom's family insisted, and she was stuck doing it. The bride got tired with all the photo taking and refused to pose for any more photographs, even though she hadn't taken photos with the groom's extended family. Meanwhile, she had already taken photos with her entire family, extended family, and parents' friends. The groom's cousin told the bride she walked in elegantly and she spent hours crying and refusing to come out for the wedding dinner. Half the groom's family boycotted the wedding over the bride's race and religion. Post-wedding, the bride insisted they should fly first class for their honeymoon. The groom insisted it's a waste of money, even though they had both come from money. The bride flew first class, the groom stuck to economy. Wedding was going okay until the bride and groom got hammered, groom's baby mama ex showed up, and the bride proceeded to lock herself in a room crying and continuing to drink by herself. It was a crap show to say the least. OP says, "How long do you wait to leave in a scenario like that?" I wasn't there, but my neighbor is a wedding DJ. Apparently a couple of weeks ago, she was at a wedding where the bride did her first dance with her ex, who for some reason was invited, because he was a better dancer than her new husband, and she didn't want to get, in her words, shown up. My cousin got his casual hookup pregnant, and somehow they came to the conclusion that they needed to get married. Instead of going and getting quietly married, they decided they needed a gigantic, expensive wedding. Like 5-course meal, 300 plus guests, 12 bridesmaids kind of wedding. Obviously, something like this takes a while to plan, and as a result, she was about 7 months pregnant. Now, nothing wrong with going down the aisle while expecting, but she chose this corseted dress that was cinched so tight it nearly flattened her bump out. As someone who has been pregnant, I can't imagine how uncomfortable that must have been. The fact that they had only known each other 8 months and she was 7 months pregnant was like the elephant in the room the entire wedding. She refused to acknowledge the fact that she was pregnant. She had been out of college for 10 plus years and invited all her sorority sisters. They got up and all sang this weird sorority song together. Very odd for an over 30 woman. I'm probably not explaining it very well, but it was like she was trying to act like she was much younger. They were married about 4 years, way longer than anyone thought it would last. Married less than a year, and a mutual friend my wife and I had got married. During the ceremony, my wife is crying and I asked her why, expecting a response of happy for him or something, and she said, "I always thought I will be the one to marry him." She ended up cheating on me with him and we went our separate ways. They only got married because they screwed unprotected on their first date and conceived a child. Fast forward a few months, the bride objects to going to the groom's friend for flowers for the wedding, because she has a religious objection to the gay lifestyle, in quotes. Turns out she's also incredibly racist. The groom is not homophobic or racist at all and was appalled to find out that his new wife wouldn't approve of most of his friends. The baby hasn't even been born yet and the divorce is pending. The groom saying the bride looked really chubby in her wedding dress. The groom making fun of the deaf grandmother. The groom existing. Not all of it was at the wedding, but on our way to our honeymoon, we were on a flight with this couple sitting behind us. She boarded the plane with a giant carry-on and a garment bag with a dress in it. Once they found their seats, she shoved her bags at him to put away, and then went to use the lavatory for about 15 minutes. She was really nasty towards him the whole time. Fast forward into running into them at the resort. She was super stuck up and a jerk to every female and all the staff. She didn't seem to have a problem grinding on 4 or 5 different guys during one of the dance night themed events while her husband drank alone at the bar. Finally, the day of their wedding came, and my husband ran into the groom sitting alone outside of the cafe with a drink in his hand. He sat down to chat with him, and the guy explained that he was freaking out because they had no friends or family at the wedding, because literally no one that knew him liked her or approved of the wedding, and that he wasn't even sure what he was doing there. My husband tells him he's sure it's cold feet, and to just have a drink to calm his nerves. The groom replies that it's his 5th drink. It's like 11 a.m. already. We had an oceanfront villa and they got married right outside of our back door. He looked like he was going to bolt for sure. I guess that was her plan the whole time, trap him on a remote island. Her vows. They were friends of mine who dated for nearly 2 years before their wedding. He loved her more than she loved him, obvious to all our friends, and we suspected she begrudgingly said yes to his proposal. He said his vows first and went on and on about loving her for the rest of his life. During hers, she started with 438 days. That's how long I've loved you. It seemed sweet until she ended her vows with, and I promise to love you for at least 438 more. Most thought nothing of it, and some friends called me a jerk for saying it was a subconscious sign that she wasn't in it for the long haul. She left him exactly that amount of days after the wedding with the note that said, I kept my vow to love you for 438 days more, but I can't for a single day more. Called it. At the wedding, bride-to-be turns up 30 minutes late, arrives inconsolably sobbing, helped down the aisle. Ceremony weird and filled with cries from the bride. Afterwards, spoke to the bride's father and asked how things were. His response, well, that was like getting a cat in a paper bag. Divorced 3 months later. Backstory, the groom, whom we knew, was from a wealthy family. Bride's family saw money and persuaded their darling daughter to marry the guy. She realized the mistake. She ended up with nothing. His family had money, but the groom was young and had nothing. Screwed up people out here, folks. People who have accidentally caused the death of another person. What happened? When I was around 4, I was inappropriately touched by my cousin who was babysitting me. I told on her, and she took her own life. I posted this before in more detail, but the truncated version is when I was 16 years old, I hit an 87-year-old man after he ran a stop sign. I was with him holding his hand when he died on the sidewalk. He had a heart attack. They weren't able to determine if he had the heart attack before the accident, which would explain why he blew through the stop sign, or if he had one as a result. His family was very gracious, and I am very grateful for them. His son called me the day after it happened, and told me his mom had died 6 months prior. His dad had been very depressed, and while they were sad he died this way, they were happy to think their parents were reunited. I was dating this girl that was a little dysfunctional due to having been a victim of CSA by her grandpa and nobody knew about it. I noticed some red flags and got her to open up and tell me about it. After we broke up, I told her mom she should stop inviting grandpa over to Thanksgiving dinners due to the SA. The mom called me a liar, but after asking the other daughters and cousins about it, they confirmed it was true and that they had all been inappropriately touched too. After word got back to grandma, she said, I'll take care of it. Fast forward a week and grandpa is dead. Apparently grandpa had a lot of serious medications he was taking and grandma messed with the dosage which killed him. His death was ruled natural cause and nothing ever happened to grandma. It was my mother-in-law's birthday and her daughter and son-in-law had dinner for the event at their place. My wife, 3 kids, and I drove out after work. As we pulled up to their cul-de-sac home in the dark, I saw something odd in the grass between the sidewalk and street near their mailbox. When I got out, an old man, about 80 years old, called over to me asking if I wouldn't mind helping him up. Said he had been out for a walk, stumbled, and been in that spot for about 45 minutes. My wife and daughters went inside the house. My then 12-year-old son stayed with me while I helped the man up. Wonderful guy, started saying this was the icing on the cake for his day, as he had fallen asleep early afternoon on his couch with a lit cigarette, which caught the couch on fire. Fire department came, put the fire out with little damage, and moved the couch to the curb when they were done. By this time, my brother-in-law had come outside with us. We walked the man back to his house about 5 doors down. During our trip there, he regaled us with stories of him in the Navy during the war, and I'm ashamed to say I can't remember which war he had said. He made special not to talk to my son about how wonderful it was that he was helping. Introduced himself to us as Bill, said he was the last unpaid bill. Thought that was pretty clever. As we made to leave, he asked if we would bring his couch from the curb back up to the house for him. Not sure why he wanted it, didn't ask. So my brother-in-law and I moved the couch and set it next to the house outside of his garage. We wished Bill well, then headed back to the house for dinner. When I got in, I noticed that my shirt smelled of burnt plastic. Brother-in-law gave me a sweatshirt to change into, and we had a great birthday celebration before I and the family left about 2 hours later for home. Around 2:30 the next morning, our phone rang. My wife answered, and I pretended to be more asleep than I actually was so I didn't have to deal with the bad phone call in the wee early hours. They're very seldom about good things. It was the police department from the town my brother-in-law and sister-in-law lived in. They asked me questions about my activities the previous evening while I was at their house. The couch reignited and burned Bill's house down, killing him in the process. The police grilled my brother-in-law, examined his arms, then called me. I don't think I slept well for over a month afterwards and couldn't get the tragedy out of my head for a long time. I should have known from the smell on my clothes that it wasn't safe to move that couch. I should have put the pieces together, but I was just too interested in getting back to my family to celebrate. Nothing more ever came of it, but I'll never get rid of the knowledge that if I hadn't committed to one simple action that I performed, then another human being would not have died. I was relieved when my sister-in-law and brother-in-law moved a couple of years later because I hated seeing that empty lot every time I went to their house. This was maybe 11 years ago, but to this day, about once a year around my mother-in-law's birthday, my brother-in-law and I still have a toast to the last unpaid bill. Turned left into my sister's driveway at 3 a.m. A guy on a Harley was doing 60 miles per hour in a 30 with no headlight. My half-ton pickup left 4 feet of skid marks from being pushed back by the force. I still remember seeing him do mid-air somersaults. This was 1976. Dang, that guy was fully responsible for his own death. You just happened to be there. Lucky he didn't take you with him. It's a shame, but double the speed limit in the middle of the night with no lights? 100% his fault. War survivor from Chechnya 94 to 96 war. I told a girl, maybe 17 years old, to run out from the apartment building because I was so sure it was going to collapse. It didn't collapse, and she ran out into a hail of gunfire and died. I was so scared that I stayed in the building and it just never collapsed the entire time, so I left out the back. I often think about that. It was such a quick decision. She was right near the door. I was on my way out because the building felt like it was shaking, and I saw her and said, "Run out, the roof is gonna fall," and she ran out in a hurry and got blown apart by gunfire, shrieking in pain until she was hit again and presumably died. I wish I didn't tell her that, obviously. It still sort of haunts me to this day, especially her screaming. But I also know that I made the decision in goodwill, trying to save her life. And to be fair, the building really felt like it was going to collapse, and everyone was running out, not just me. Anybody would have told her to run as well. Nobody knew they were opening fire on the building. I know it sounds like lame justifications, but it is all I can think of to help ease my mind. Anybody would have done the same. I hope at least. I was supposed to meet a friend ahead to soccer practice, but he wasn't there when I got to where we were supposed to meet. I got impatient and decided to head to practice myself. He never got there, so I assumed he was sick or something. 2 days later, my mom told me he got hit by a car and died after running out in the street to get a ball he was kicking while waiting for me. The timing of things seems like if I had waited just a minute longer, he wouldn't have had to wait for me and would have lived. I was driving from a friend's house last November on a road I've driven a million times. I knew one area was particularly dark at night because the city hadn't replaced the streetlights in over a decade. The dark area also crests a hill in a residential area between 2 crosswalks that are far apart, so people cross the road at the top of this hill. Knowing all this, I still never saw him coming. There was a huge thud and my window was cracked all the way across. I turned around and saw him lying motionless on the sidewalk. It was late and no one else was there, so it was just me, parked on a side street, and this body. I checked his pulse while I was on the phone with 911, but couldn't feel anything because I was shaking so badly. This was maybe a quarter mile from the hospital, so the paramedics were there before I even realized what happened. They put him up on a stretcher with this strange device that I later found out was to automatically compress his chest. The cops showed up and I finally saw my car with the flashlight. There was a large chunk of flesh and blood caught on the side of my car. I passed my sobriety test and they took me home. He lived for 3 days before dying due to complications of the accident and was never conscious during that time. I found out through a friend of mine who's the editor at a local paper that the police were still considering charges. Also how I found out that he died. I was obviously a mess about the accident, but also the possibility of involuntary manslaughter. After the officer called me to tell me officially that he died, I consulted a lawyer and was basically told not to talk to the police again and to let them conduct their own investigation. 2 grueling weeks later, I got a phone call at midnight from the officer who gave me my sobriety test. He worked third shift. He told me that the guy was incredibly intoxicated and basically stepped into oncoming traffic without paying attention. With that info, I wasn't to be charged and I could go pick my car back up. The relief I felt was indescribable, but also terrible that I could feel so great in a situation where someone died. What made that feeling the worst was that the officer told me the family of the guy were super concerned with how I was doing and that they wanted to tell me they didn't blame me. He was 24 and had just graduated college. It was his last night in town before going back to his hometown. I go to his Facebook page every once in a while just so I don't forget what he looked like. I'm at least partially responsible for 3 deaths. So I'm a weather forecaster. A few years ago, I was forecasting for Afghanistan. Now, we were doing these forecasts from a base in the States, which means we had to coordinate our forecast with someone who was deployed to Afghanistan. Sometimes the downrange forecaster was really experienced, other times they weren't. It was a mixed bag. Anyway, I had been forecasting for at least 2 years before this incident. I was familiar with it, and I was actually in a supervisory capacity, simply overseeing all of the forecasts going out in my zone. Well, one day, I was talking with one of my forecasters about the potential for large hail and how I'd like him to put that in his forecast. Now that's a big thing to put in a forecast because of how operationally significant this is. Aircraft must be put in hangars, missions are canceled, assets must be protected, etc. So when it came time to discuss this with the downrange forecaster, he was absolutely against it. He didn't want to brief that to the commander because, again, missions have to be canceled based on what you think will happen. If you're wrong, you've set back a lot of people and wasted a lot of time. So the deployed forecaster tries to argue against it, but his reasoning really just boiled down to, I don't want to brief that. So when I wasn't looking, he essentially just pulled rank on my junior forecaster and forced him to take it out of the forecast. And so we went out to the base with no hail in it, only hinting at some vicinity thunderstorms. Well, when I noticed, I was furious, but I said screw it, we'll let him be wrong. This was the first time I'd ever wanted to put large hail in a forecast. Maybe we were over-forecasting it. Nope. Basically, right on schedule, a huge thunderstorm popped up and dumped large hail on the base. It did a few million in damage to aircraft, injured a helipilot who was pre-flighting his bird, and killed 3 Afghan National Army soldiers who had left on a patrol and couldn't find any cover. They wound up beaten to death by hail. That has always bugged me. They didn't need to die. We knew the potential was there, and I basically just let an incorrect forecast go out that got them killed. 3 lanes wide on my side of the street. I am in the lane closest to the middle of the street. I just get through an intersection and see a car attempting to turn in front of me into a gas station. This gas station entrance is close enough to the intersection I just went through that there is no middle section for them to wait in to turn when it is clear. They inch into my lane across a double yellow line and stop. I quickly get over to my right 1 lane. They inch over into the next lane and stop again. I start to panic. Why are they stopping? What is he doing? I quickly see I can get in the far right lane and move over. This older man driving, I think he panicked. He tries to gas it past me into the gas station. I'm in a Dodge Dakota and they're in an old Chevy truck with rack seating. I slow down as much as I can, but there is no time. I T-bone them and my car basically slams them into a concrete pole. I stop a couple of feet from a concrete wall myself. I get out of the car with my adrenaline on full. I'm not even sure if I'm hurt or not. I can't feel anything anyway. I stumble over to their car to see if they're okay. The looks I received from this old man and his wife still haunt me to this day. They looked at me like I was the Grim Reaper coming to claim them. Absolute horror. Blood coming down their face, wondering why I did this to them as smoke from the front of their car looms over them like creeping death. The woman died later that day from her injuries at the local hospital. The man later tried to sue me, but I was cleared of any legal wrongdoing based on the investigation that had taken place. They had concluded that I had done everything I could have done to avoid a collision. It was just unfortunate timing that this older gentleman made an illegal driving decision. A decision I am sure he regretted until the end of his days. I'm still messed up from this even though it was years and years ago. Getting cleared legally does nothing for one's own conscience and psyche. My vehicle, whether it was intentional or not, was used as an instrument of destruction that ended up killing a man's wife. I have PTSD flashbacks. If I drive by a similar looking area that looks similar to the accident site, I still get such crippling anxiety that I have to disassociate in order to not lose control. I have severe depression, and I don't know how I function and survive, to be perfectly honest. I've run the gamut of emotions over this incident. I have lost friends, relationships, and isolated from my family. Why? I don't feel I deserve what was taken away from others. I'm slowly killing myself daily over it because I can't find any meaning in it. That's because there is no meaning. It was an accident and I don't know how to accept it and move on. I've done different types of therapy. I've taken medication. I've talked to many people about it and nothing has changed. The reason I write all of this is to please implore all of you to be safe when you are behind the wheel of any motor vehicle. I did everything I could to be careful and something horrible still happened. I can't even imagine being the same level of reckless I have seen other drivers who end up getting away with it with absolutely no consequences. I hope with every ounce of my being that no one ever experiences the type of pain and suffering that has become my everyday life and reality. I wouldn't wish this pain, guilt, or suffering upon my worst enemy. I used to work a strange overnight schedule, 10-hour shifts Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. I try and keep awake the same hours on my days off, especially on Thursdays. This was a pretty rural area, so there wasn't much open at those hours except a gas station that had a tiny cafe area. I didn't want to keep people in the house awake, so I spent a lot of time at the gas station. I'd usually read or talk with the cashier on duty. I think she felt a little safer having someone else there too. One night, a man comes in with a little boy and asks if they can use the bathroom. It's something like 3 a.m. The kid looks sick or uncomfortable. To me, it looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. After they're in the bathroom, the cashier and I look at each other. She thinks there's something off about this too. I went outside to get a description of the vehicle. After they leave, we call the police. The local police passed it along to the county sheriff's department and a local officer came to the gas station. He asked us a couple more questions and we listened to his radio to hear what was happening. A county officer spots the truck and pulls it over. After the officer gets out of the car, the truck backs into it and takes off. The police pursue him. We didn't get a lot of details after that. He crashed or abandoned the truck. The truck was on fire and loose rounds of ammunition were going off in the truck. I believe the boy was somewhere safe because I didn't hear any more about him. The guy tried to swim across a small but deceptively treacherous river and he drowned. That was close to 20 years ago. If I remember correctly, he was the boy's dad but did not have custody. He was recently released from prison and the truck was stolen. At the time of the story, the man had been recently released from prison prior to stealing the truck and drowning. My wife and I were both very sick with the flu. My father watched our 2 small children and even came to sit with me in the hospital. The day after I got out of the hospital, he got the flu and died a couple days later. I still feel guilty knowing that he didn't have to sit with my children or that he didn't have to sit by my bedside, but he did. It helps knowing that he loved me so much that he was willing to put his life at risk to be with me. I just never imagined that the flu could have been so serious to be hospitalized, much less kill someone. I hold myself responsible and I feel guilty for getting him sick. When I was 18, I was working the night shift in a nursing home as an aide. Part of my job was to turn the paralyzed patients every 2 hours to make sure they didn't get bed sores. This one particular resident had late-stage Parkinson's disease, and her muscles and joints were stiff and brittle, and she was catatonic. As I was flipping her from one side to another, I applied light pressure to her leg to move her back a bit, and this snapped her femur. Given her age and health, the doctors decided that surgery was dangerous and she would have to heal on its own, if at all. Because of this, we could no longer flip her, which resulted in bed sores. She eventually went septic from those bed sores and died of septic shock. I always felt so bad about that. I haven't told many of my friends this story, but sharing it has helped wrap my head around what happened. It was about 3 a.m. on a Thursday last December. I lived in Fort Lauderdale at the time. I was heading back from a party at my friend's house pretty bleary-eyed. I had slept for a few hours and then got in my car. I was running out of gas, so I stopped at a gas station right off of I-95 before heading north to home. A guy walks up to me while I'm pumping gas and he asks for directions. He was older and a bit drunk. He came off as a yachty, and yachties aren't really common in that part of town. I had a bunch of yachty friends, so he didn't sketch me out, but I immediately kind of wrote him off. I told him to take I-95 north. He stumbles off and gets on his Vespa. Scooters are super common in South Florida, and then drives away. I go inside, get a drink, and then sit in my car for a few minutes, waking up before going. I hit the highway and I'm cruising north when I see a ton of emergency lights coming down the southbound side. I remember thinking, oh no, something's going down. I started paying closer attention to the road in front of me, and there were lights in my rear view too, coming up really freaking gassed. What happened next was kind of a blur and is not work safe. There were recognizable body parts in the road. Part of an arm, an upper torso with the head attached, blood everywhere, bits and pieces of plastic and metal in the road, and lumps of flesh or organ or something. I didn't see any of it until I was extremely close, but the image is something that has really messed me up. I called my mom. She said I was incoherent and screaming about blood. Florida Highway Patrol checked my car, which had blood on it but no damage, the next day, and the officer explained to me an older white male on a scooter had gotten on I-95 north. He merged inappropriately and was hit by a dump truck, and his corpse was hit by several other vehicles, including mine. They closed I-95 for the entire morning, well past rush hour. The news article said that remains and debris were strewn across an area the size of a football field. I sold my car and moved. The first 2 months were very rough, but I'm feeling better now, despite shaking at the moment. TLDR, I told a stranger to take the highway. He did so on a scooter. I drove through the aftermath of my advice. 7-ish a.m. on a Sunday morning. I'm heading to work in a small town at the age of 15 or 16. Come over a crest on a hill and have no time to react. T-bone someone making an illegal U-turn in a driveway. All I remember is veering off to the right and damaging someone's stone wall after the hit, crawling out of the wreckage out of breath and stumbling to see if the other person was okay. Their vehicle spun multiple times and landed in a ditch facing away, but driver's side visible from where I originally was. Driver wasn't there. Move along the vehicle and check the other side. Driver is hanging out of the passenger side window with a steady stream of blood from their skull. Bottom line for me is that I ask and implore everyone, please use your seatbelt. My mom is Thai and my dad is American, so I spend most of the year in the US and summers in Thailand. When I was 8, my family and my cousin's family were at the beach in Cha-am. My cousin's son, James, and I had been playing in the ocean for hours by this time, and we were both exhausted. Since we began playing, the water got much more violent with large waves as a thunderstorm was starting. As soon as my parents heard lightning, they yelled for us to come back to the shore, and I just started swimming back without checking to see if James was following. When I walked up onto the sand, I looked back and I couldn't see him. We were much farther out than 2 8-year-olds should have been, and James was too tired to keep himself above the water. I'm not sure what I could have done once I realized I couldn't find him, but I can't stop thinking about it. And when I go back to the condo there, I can't bring myself to get back into the ocean. Everyone responding has been incredibly supportive, and it means the world. I know realistically I couldn't change what happened, but that can't stop me from wishing I could. Thank you again to everyone for the kind words. 2 years ago, my sister was working at a dealership. Her husband and I were spending the day together until it was time to pick up sis from work. So when it came time to get his gal, I took the keys and said I'm driving. He was mad enough that he refused to go with me. When I came back with my sister, he was nowhere to be found, but it was common for him to go on walks to calm himself down, so we didn't think much of it. 8 a.m. the next morning, state police were banging on the door. They told us he was struck and killed by a train while he was sleeping on the tracks. That's not your fault. You didn't let somebody too drunk drive. That's what you're supposed to do. Was skiing with a friend when I was still living in Colorado. We were going a good speed and enjoying the mountain. When we came back onto the main trail, he was still going really fast. I yelled at him to slow down, and an elderly lady ended up merging at the same time as he looked back at me. My buddy is a good-sized guy and ended up colliding with this old woman. The ski patrol ended up grabbing her from the mountain, and she was clearly in a lot of pain. She ended up dying from her injuries a few days later. After her investigation, my buddy and the woman were both in the wrong. He had to pay some fines, but never got any sort of lawsuit. Doctors, nurses, and hospital staff of Reddit. What are your experiences, funny, sad, horrible, with people waking from anesthesia, not safe for work? A patient woke up from his wisdom tooth removal begging the doctor to let him be David Bowie. The doctor actually asked how that was supposed to happen, and the answer was that it would be fantastic. Had a patient in for an endoscopy. As a matter of course, we place a speculum, think ball gag, but a metal ring instead of a ball, in the mouth through which to pass the scope so the patient doesn't bite the scope once they're under. We typically place it right at induction of anesthesia. This patient had the presence of mind to ask us what the safe word was before he lost consciousness as we placed the speculum. One of the rare times the whole OR erupted in laughter. I once had a patient start totally trashing her sister, telling me how she has always been the black sheep of the family, is a scumbag and wants to bang her husband. She's just going off, and sitting in the doorway was the sister, the only one there to support her after surgery. You could tell it was crushing for her. This was probably an hour after the patient left PACU, conscious but still pretty whacked out. I had a patient pet an invisible kitty that was named after me. The next day, was completely with it, and was wondering what happened to that kitty. I'm an anesthesia student currently doing my clinical rotations, and I had an old guy wake up, and the first thing he asked was, "Do I still have my balls?" And I told him, "Yep, both of them." And he said, "Both? Aw, you guys are great." Not hospital staff, but my great-grandfather had surgery one time, and I was in the room when he woke up. He was a World War II veteran and was convinced that he was in a German POW camp. He recognized me and told me I had to help him escape by killing the guards, nurses, because he knew I knew how to kill people. I was 16, obviously a trained killer. When the nurse came in, he was calm and kept motioning with his head at her to me and finally looked at me and said, "Kill her, now!" She always came back with another male nurse after that. Nurse here, this really big, hairy Turkish guy, whom I've never met before, told me how much he loved me and that he wanted to kiss me. I'm male, by the way. He wanted to kiss you. I hate this comment. My father-in-law was in a car accident that shattered his face, several vertebrae, and his pelvis. This isn't so much a story about what he said, but what he did. He was in a coma for 3 weeks and had to be heavily restrained when coming out of it. He was a Marine in Vietnam. He was captured and escaped, and he still hated being restrained. My wife went to visit him on a Sunday, and the doctors told her that tomorrow he was going to be the first patient to use a new $30,000 restraint system that would cause him less discomfort. On Monday afternoon, she visited again, and he was in the same restraints as before. My wife asked, and the nurse explained that he destroyed the entire restraint system. It lasted less than an hour. It wasn't salvageable. Not the doctor or the nurse, but I had a lot of ear infections when I was younger, and my final time, I was about 7, I woke up to the Rugrats on a TV in the room. I hated the Rugrats at the time. Cued the following conversation. "Why are the Rugrats on?" "You woke up earlier and said you wanted us to put on the Rugrats. We asked why, and you said that you hated the Rugrats and wanted to watch it so you could be angry. Why did I want to be angry? You said you wanted to be angry because you don't like being so happy all the time." Told to me by my wife, confirmed by the nurse. I was in the bed of the hospital room, waiting for surgery. They already gave me meds to calm me, but they knocked me out. 2 nurses come in to move me to a gurney, but they were small and I'm big, so they can't move me over. My wife came over and poked me in the ribs saying, "You're snoring, roll over," and I rolled right onto the gurney. Went straight from the ER to surgery to put a plate in my badly broken arm, so I hadn't been in a ward, etc. prior to the operation. Hold up, I'm talking about this. I am ranting about this right now. Why do people feel the need to put etc. in places that it doesn't belong? It's one item and it's not even part of a list. If you have more than 3 things to say, you can put etc. at the end of it and have it make sense. But if you say, I was in a place, etc., that's only one place. Etc. means and so on, and so forth, and the rest, etc. Redditors, learn to English. Now we can move on. Came out of surgery and recovery and was being pushed in a hospital bed to a ward. We turned into a ward and it was full of elderly people. I was in my early 20s. I turned to the hospital porter pushing me and shouted, "Sorry, we seem to have taken a wrong turn. We're in the morgue." My first memory when waking up from shoulder surgery was a somewhat panicked nurse rummaging through the blankets at the bottom of my bed, repeatedly muttering, "Where are his legs? Where are his legs?" I always cross my legs when I sit and lay down, and apparently I must have done this as I was initially coming off the anesthesia. It freaked me out for a second, but then I processed what was going on. The nurse seemed relieved when I mumbled, "They're right here," and nearly kicked her in the face when I extended my legs. Patient checking in. I was 18 and just had my appendix removed. My mom was at my bedside. I wake up in more pain from the operation than the appendicitis, and even worse, my sack is itchy. I'm wearing a hospital gown and I'm out of it, so I put my hand on my stomach and run it down to my skin so I can scratch my sack. Obviously not wearing underwear, and my hand runs down an excess of smooth skin, then suddenly I'm touching my goods. I rummage around and come to the conclusion that someone has shaved my pubes. No one told me this would happen. I was livid. It's the height of visiting hours, and I'm shouting in my broad Scottish accent, "Oh, Mum, they shaved my pubes. I'm not happy about this. I want my pubes back. That's not right. No one told me about this. Get my pubes." My mother was mortified, and she's trying to get me to calm down while laughing and trying to avoid a scene. They grew back in about 4 weeks, so it was no biggie, but at the time, it was a serious issue. So I'm an ER tech, and we have this regular that comes in all the time. She's an old black lady who has a lot of health issues, including dementia. This time, I'm actually not entirely sure why she was coming in, but whatever it was, she needed to be intubated. So we sedated her, put the tube in, and did what we needed. When everything was finished, we called EMS to pick her up and take her back home. When they arrived, the nurse and I went in to prep her to leave. The lady is just starting to wake up from sedation, so with the EMT standing in the room, we take out her Foley catheter. Then, she queefs. The nurse and I smirk at each other, but this is fairly common and not the funny part. The funny part is that the noise seemed to surprise her, and apparently remind her what was going on, because she gasps and then looks over to the EMTs and says in an attempt at a sexy voice, "You boys ever seen a black coochie before?" Everyone in the room had to take a second to attempt to regain composure, but the EMTs ended up having to leave the room and the nurse is crouching on the ground trying not to die. I, since I still have the Foley in my hands, don't have this freedom, and I'm forced to try to keep my sides from launching into orbit. It's since become a running joke around the ER. When my husband woke up from having his wisdom teeth surgically removed, his nurse was a rather large lady, like 350 plus. He looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You're too beautiful to be a nurse. You should have been a model. Why don't you just come home with me and my wife?" Yes, he was propositioning a 3-way with a 50-year-old, 350-pound nurse. Most awkward moment of my life. I got my wisdom teeth out last month and was curiously subdued, my wife informed me, at least at the office. She loaded me up in the car and away we went. About halfway home, she called my mother to let her know that the surgery went well and I remained stonily quiet. After she got off the phone, I demanded that my wife call my mother back. When she did so, I told her, "Mom, you have lots of dogs, and they need lots of love." Then I made the cut the call motion to my wife. When we arrived home, I was brought up short by my wife's pillowcase, which has a sloth on it. I asked out loud, "Honey, there's a freaking sloth in here. How do we catch one? They're so fast." Then she tried to take my jeans off of me so I could go to sleep and I yelled, "Whoa there, Missy," when she grabbed for the fly. All in all, a pretty great morning. When I was 14, I had eye surgery. Coming out of anesthesia, the nurses asked me if I could remember my name. I slurred, "My name is Worcestershire sauce." No, wait, that's not a cool name. "My name is Shark." Wish I was earlier to this one. My fiancée recently had her tonsils removed. Her mother and I were there when she woke up. After a few minutes, she told her mother, "Now that I've got my tonsils out, I can fit more of his woohoo in my mouth." It was awkward. When I got my wisdom teeth out, I apparently called my Middle Eastern surgeon a sly Arabian tooth chief after coming to. That was fun to learn about when I regained mental clarity. I had surgery on my wrist and came out of anesthesia screaming, "My balls hurt!" The doctor came in and asked what was wrong. I said, "My balls hurt!" He replied, "Dude, you had wrist surgery. No one touched your balls." Two stories. One, I had a lady in her 70s who drank martinis and took Xanax all day every day, so she had such a strong tolerance to the sedation I was giving her that she totally stopped breathing while still awake. I had to say, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to bag you now," and she mouthed okay, and I put the ambu bag on her face and force breathed for her until she got her respiratory effort back. 2. I was in helping with the heart procedure, and the patient went into complete heart block and his heart stopped beating. I hop up to the table and start chest compressions while they are hurriedly trying to put in a temporary pacing wire. I had an arterial pressure waveform on the monitor, so I could see exactly how hard to do the chest compressions, and the man never lost consciousness. So I'm doing chest compressions on a dude while he looks right at my face the whole time. So it was like, press, sorry, press, sorry, for about 2 minutes until the pacing wire was in place. Not a doc, but a few years ago I had my gallbladder removed. 2 stories from that ordeal. 1. Going into surgery, I was being given anesthesia. During this, I apparently looked at the tech and asked him to remove the mask from my face so I could scratch my nose. He said no, and I passed out halfway through my response of, "Aww." 2. Still very out of it, getting ready to be discharged after a day of recovery. It was very bad and I was on a lot of meds. I stood up to change and could feel the incision just below my navel open. I looked down and my hand was red and there was a growing red spot on the gown. I look up and see the color drain from my mother's face, to which I respond, "It's cool, I got this." But back in the bed, hit the call button and say, "I don't mean to bother you, but one of my incisions appears to have reopened. I'm not in pain, but there is a fair amount of blood. If you could have someone stop by when they are free, that would be awesome." Not 15 seconds later, a nurse comes flying into the room, looks, says, "Holy crap, be right back with supplies," and flies out of the room before returning and fixing the problem. When asked why I wasn't panicking, I simply responded, "I figured I'm already in the right place for this sort of thing." I mean, he's not wrong. Kind of a W. I was the patient. I'd had all 4 wisdom teeth taken out at once, and I woke up earlier than expected in recovery. Early enough that they hadn't taken out the wadding at the back of my mouth meant to absorb the blood. So I woke up, immediately felt like I was choking, and panicked. I leapt off the bed, and a bunch of nurses came to restrain me. Still out of it, I fought them and definitely gave one of them a good punch before they got me back on the bed. I passed out again straight away. Still feel bad about it. Poor nurse. When I got all 4 of my wisdom teeth taken out, the nurse tried to put me in a wheelchair. Cue dialogue. "Let's get you in a wheelchair." "I got it, baby." Think Fetty Wap type accent. I'm very white. "Oh, no, I don't think that's a good idea." Tries to stand, but slams into wall and slides down face first. "Oh no!" She put me in the wheelchair and rolled me to the car. I giggled the whole way there while leaning my head on her hand and looking up at her face. Side note, hands down the best 2 weeks of summer I've ever had. KFC potatoes and ice cream all day while in a drug stupor? Heck yes. I hear I just played Minecraft with my little brother and dug enormous holes the entire time. Came out of anesthetic, and the lead nurse decides it's time to tell me all about post-op care. She says, "Now this is going to be a pain in the butt," and I said, "If that's the case, then you guys performed the wrong procedure." It was a nose operation. The assistant nurse started laughing. Lead nurse, not so amused. Not a doc or nurse. When I got my wisdom teeth out, they strapped my arm down for the IV anesthetic. Apparently, before passing out, I looked up at the white-haired German dentist and said in my best Connery, "Goldfinger, do you expect me to talk?" The dentist didn't reply, but he did tell me after surgery that it was one of the funniest things anyone asked him in a haze. "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to sleep." Not a doctor. A friend was in a car crash pretty bad. He was in a coma for 2 months and he had a female doctor. For 2 months until he came out of his coma, every time his doctor was checking on him, he would reach up and grab her breast, guessing he heard her voice. When we told him about it, he didn't believe us, so we asked her and she confirmed it. She said she never stopped him because it seemed to keep him calm. I was the patient, but I think this qualifies. Colonoscopy. In this big lounge chair, still half asleep in recovery, I half roll over and let rip the biggest fart in history. The devil himself created this one. I open half an eye at the nurse, ask, "Was that me?" Jaw on the ground, she nods, and I go back to sleep. I was working in the pediatric ER and sedating a skater kid, 14 or 15. We're talking more a wannabe suburban kid rather than a punk. Kind of kid that obviously joined a frat in college. His mom is there in the room as he starts waking up once we had his wrist set and in the cast. His mom is typical well-to-do suburban mom who spends lots of time at yoga and PTA meetings, i.e. not trashy at all, and family was likely from a well-to-do part of town. My buddy, who is fairly hairy on his arms, etc., we don't need to have this discussion again, reached across his upper chest to grab an IV line. Kid was half asleep, raised his head up with his eyes still closed, and licked my buddy's arm with this exaggerated lick like it was an ice cream cone. Kid flops his head back onto the pillow and his mom just looks mortified in the 2 to 3 seconds that pass before he slurs out, Man, I sure do love to lick some. His mom immediately turned bright red and walked out of the room, and we all busted out laughing except the guy who got licked. The ER doc was this young petite girl, and she said she peed herself a little, she was laughing so hard. For months, we would give that guy lick emotions in the air when we passed him in the hall and putting Rolling Stone stickers in his locker, etc. I still give him crap about that from time to time. My favorite is to catch him chatting or something, standing at the desk, and to lean over and sniff his forearm and ask if he's been fishing. Not a nurse, but I have a good one. It's been 15 years and I'm still horrified when I think about it. I have to preface the story by saying that I have a super conservative, girl next door type of personality. I am shy, somewhat of an introvert, and most definitely never want to be the center of attention on purpose. I went in for a colonoscopy with the yum-yum juice that made me forget everything that happened, although I vaguely remember talking and hearing laughter. When I woke up, people were smirking and glancing at each other, trying to suppress their laughter. I asked if something happened, and the staff reassured me that everything was good. So when the doctor came in to talk to me before I was released, I asked him if something funny had happened. He reassured me that I had a very normal procedure and then told me that sometimes the medication caused people to lower their inhibitions, but that the effect wore off very quickly, as does the medication. I asked him what he meant by lowering their inhibitions, and he paused again and reassured me that it happens to a lot of people. So yeah, I spent my entire colonoscopy talking dirty to my doctor and his tools. I never went back to that doctor again. TLDR, yum-yum juice made me say dirty things to the doctor, change doctors, and consider moving out of state due to my humiliation. I had to get hardware installed in my leg for a nasty bone break at an overseas base. A few days later, my buddy and I were having lunch on base. A group of women came in and sat down at the table next to us, and we struck up a conversation. One of them asked what I had gotten done. I was in a huge cast and on crutches. I tell her the procedure. She gets a funny look on her face and asked when it was done. I tell her the date. She immediately starts laughing and tells her friends, "This is the guy!" Now they're all howling with laughter. It took a while to tell the story because they're in tears from laughing. Apparently, when I was coming out of sedation, I grabbed a corpsman's butt and hung on for dear life, who was the woman I was currently talking to at the restaurant. I just wanted to crawl into a hole when I heard the story. TLDR, grabbed a girl's butt in the OR, got nicknamed by the staff, and became the talk of the hospital for a while. Edit. My top comment is how I perved on some poor woman when I was out of my gourd on drugs. Wonderful. I was the patient, but I had to get 5 teeth pulled. The nurse was helping my mom shuffle me to the car. I turned to thank her, but couldn't get my mouth to work, so I bowed and doffed an imaginary cap. My BFF had a vasectomy, and when he was first given the drugs, 3 nurses walked in that were rather attractive. He looks up with his wife in the room and says, "If I would have known there was going to be hot women in here, I would have worn my big woohoo!" I've had a vasectomy, so this one is especially funny to me since they usually only use localized numbing agents. Unless he got a special doctor, that comment was 100% him. I woke up in a recovery room after having my wisdom teeth out, and no one was in there with me, so I thought it'd be a good idea to get up and have a look around. Apparently, I had been awake a minute before and asked the doctor for some water, but when she left to get it, I went in and out of consciousness and forgot all about it. They were pretty terrified when I just up and vanished. A few months later, my brother had his wisdom teeth out. We left the surgeons with no issue, but on the drive home, my brother lost his mind. I had to take a circuitous route home because my brother wanted to see the circus. Every house we drove past, he was pointing out imaginary animals and giggling hysterically. He was 17 at the time. Anesthesia apparently does weird stuff to us. While not medical, I was a prison officer doing an escort for and handcuffed to a prisoner having a minor procedure done under general anesthetic. After the procedure, he starts waking up and chatting about stuff. Then he starts telling me about his mobile phone he had smuggled in, the make and model, and how he keeps it plugged in his butt. Edit for those asking, I completed a security report and submitted it to the prison police department, I forget the names, and, as with the prisoner I saw swallowing drugs smuggled in, nothing happened. It was a small think phone. I think it was the Samsung Juke around 10 years ago, a finger from a latex glove to wrap it. I've been under anesthesia several times over the last 3 years, and no, I'm not a doctor or nurse either. The most recent time, however, I went in for an outpatient procedure where a stent was placed into a ureter, tube that leads to kidney. They go through your urethra to put it in, hence the anesthesia. Anyhow, it took more than the normal dose to put me under, and my wife later told me that when I came to, I was playing with myself and asking her if she wanted to take a ride to make sure this thing still works before we get out of here. The nurse was there at the time also. My wife told me she attempted to keep me covered for the nurse's sake, but I wasn't having it. I have no recollection of those events. Not a professional, medical or otherwise, but on the way home from the dentist, I was gone, and something in my mind remembered Metal Gear Solid, and I started yelling, "Liquid!" a la Snake. Apparently, I almost caused my mom to crash the car, and it quickly became annoying very fast, as one can imagine. Just coming out of surgery, and the nurse says, "I'm going to take your temperature now," to which I respond, "Will you give it back?" I'm not the medical professional in this story. My husband had emergency surgery a few years ago, and when he woke up, he was just different. I can't explain it. He recognized who I was, but his personality was completely different, and the way he spoke to me was completely different. It's sort of like in movies where people wake up in someone else's body. It freaked me the heck out. 36 hours later, it was like he just woke up and was himself again. The weird part is, he had no memory of the past 36 hours. He remembers being sick and he remembers the emergency room, but after that, nothing. A lot of people came to visit him in that time period too, a bunch of family and everyone from the office, and he has no memory of any of them. The only thing that I can think of is that whatever medication that was used in the anesthesia that gorked him finally worked its way out of his system. Thank you for the new verb, to gork. While on fentanyl for gallstones in the ER, I asked the ultrasound tech if she wanted to take a selfie with me. She declined and I got butthurt about it. Apparently, I also told my sweet grandmother, when asked if I was okay, that I was, "Fine, Gran, I'm high as giraffe balls."
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.